As I started work on my analysis video on Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, I thought it would be a good idea to briefly talk about my thoughts on the first movie in the video. The only problem was that I ended up talking about the film way too much to the point that I ultimately had to cut it from the analysis, as it took time away from what was actually important. Yet after I did that, it hit me. Why don't I just talk about this movie in its own video? However, I feel like a video just covering a single 12-year-old movie most people felt indifferently towards wouldn't be all that interesting. That's when I decided, how about instead I talk about every piece of the Puss in Boots canon, outside of The Last Wish, that's getting a dedicated video. Welcome to the Puss in Boots Retrospective, where I will talk about my thoughts on the first movie, the Adventures of Puss in Boots TV show which I recently binge watched through, as well as the dedicated Puss in Boots shorts like the 3 Diablos, Traps in Epic Tale, and even the Trident for good measure. That way you'll be able to hear my thoughts on all pieces of Puss in Boots media before I talk about my favourite of the batch. However, it also means that I don't need to waste time in the analysis video talking about these previous entries, as I can just refer back to this video. Trust me, the Last Wish analysis will be long enough without this extra stuff butting in. Now there's a lot of Puss in Boots content, so before we start I need to establish what I'm covering. Basically, everything I just mentioned from the movie to the TV show to the 3 main shorts will be included in this video. However, the Shrek movies and shorts which feature Puss won't count because they're about Shrek primarily, not Puss. All I'll say when it comes to the Shrek content though is that Puss won Far Far Away Idol and it wasn't even close, although the 3 blind mice got snubbed. I will also only cover the products based around this version of Puss which exists within the Shrek universe. Puss in Boots is a pre-established fairy tale character, so naturally there have been multiple adaptations of his story, of varying levels of quality. However, these alternate iterations of the character won't be included as it is ultimately a different canon and thus a different character. In this video, I'm exclusively referring to the Shrek version of the character everyone knows and loves. As much as I want to watch this Japanese adaptation of the Puss in Boots story which featured animations from the one and only Hayao Miyazaki, no, I'm not joking, it's still a different canon. I also can't find it anywhere. Finally, I'm specifically focusing on televised media, which means that I'm not covering book adaptations or the video game. Trust me, I would love to talk about the video game at some point if I can get my hands on it, but I can't record any gameplay footage at the moment as I don't have a capture card. If you guys really want me to review the game though, then let me know and I'll get a capture card to do it. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's start this very long retrospective. By the way, this video will contain spoilers and opinions, so just be aware. Okay, so, funny story, whilst I was working on this video, I came across a YouTube video by the channel Hayley Whipjack, where she watched and reviewed every piece of the Shrek canon, which includes everything this video covers, plus a whole lot more. I just wanted to shout out this 5-hour video, as Hayley achieved something even I didn't bother achieving, and I think she deserves more recognition for this video. Just wanted to shout them out because their video is so similar to this one. Anyway, let's begin this retrospective with the very first solo adventure, the original Puss in Boots movie. Puss in Boots was released all the way back in 2011. Yeah, it was seriously that long ago. The movie is over 12 years old. That really makes me feel ancient. So before I talk about this film in detail, I first want to go over my history with it. Unlike the other products featured in this video, I have a very personal connection with the first Puss in Boots movie. You see, whilst I wasn't actually the biggest Shrek fan as a kid, I absolutely loved Puss in Boots as a character. I thought he was so cool, and my favourite parts of the Shrek movies were any moments he was on screen. This is probably why I never got into Shrek 1 as a kid, as he doesn't appear until the sequel. Either way, Puss was my hero growing up. For most people, their childhood hero was someone like Indiana Jones. For me, it was Puss in Boots. So naturally, after I found out there was a solo Puss in Boots movie after seeing the DVD in a shop back in 2011, my first reaction was, "Ooh, I want this! I want this!" And so my mum got it. I was very young at the time, so that's why I didn't buy it myself. Naturally, due to how much I loved Puss as a character, I absolutely loved this movie back in the day. It was a true childhood favourite of mine and I've seen it many times in my life. Now the reason I mentioned my history with this movie is because I feel like I ought to tell you now that I do in fact have nostalgia for this movie, which does mean that a few of my opinions will be biased. This doesn't mean that I'm not going to mention any flaws I have in the movie. However, it does mean that I will probably be a bit more forgiving of those flaws and will end up rating the movie higher than most. I won't say that my nostalgia bias for this movie is as strong as something like The Polar Express, but it's definitely still there. Anyway, let's see how well this movie holds up. I may have nostalgia goggles on, but I'll be fair nonetheless. So let's grab our old DVDs off the shelf and re-experience this cornerstone of my childhood. And wait a minute. Contains mild comic fight scenes and innuendo? What innuendo? When are there innuendos in this movie? Is this Puss in Boots or a Bond film?
I think he's attempting re-entry, sir.
Anyway, let's get into this movie. So considering the fact that many people haven't actually seen this movie, I'm going to quickly run through the plot for those who don't know. So this film takes place before Shrek, and follows Puss in Boots, played by his legendary voice actor from the Shrek movies, Antonio Banderas, on his mission to clear his name and no longer become an outlaw. He then gets his chance of redemption when he discovers that the murderous outlaws Jack and Jill, played by Billy Bob Thornton and Amy Sedaris respectively, have gotten a hold of magic beans. Puss plans to use the beans to lead him to the giant's castle and the golden goose, who lays golden eggs, which he can use to repay his debt. We find out what his debt is when he meets up with his former childhood best friend who betrayed him, Humpty Dumpty, played by Zach Galifianakis. And we learn that Humpty tricked Puss into robbing the bank of his hometown, San Ricardo, which is what turned Puss into an outlaw. This movie then follows Puss, Humpty, and Kitty Softpaws, played by Salma Hayek, who was hired by Humpty, as they travel to the giant's castle to retrieve the golden goose and repay San Ricardo. Except, Humpty was playing Puss this whole time, and so he double-crosses him and then plans to destroy San Ricardo through the golden goose's mother, the Great Terror, before eventually having a change of heart and sacrificing himself to save the town. Puss ends up becoming a hero and a legend, and he goes off with Kitty Softpaws for more adventures. So yeah, that's the basic outline of the movie. Now that I've spoken about what actually happens, let's go over my thoughts on it. So I'd probably say that my overall thoughts on the movie are that I think it's pretty good on the whole. It's a decently enjoyable time with some fun action, great characters, and amazing music. However, this movie absolutely does not hold up well in comparison to The Last Wish. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Before making this video, the last time I rewatched this movie was in January of this year, 1 month before The Last Wish released in the UK. When I rewatched the movie then, I still thought it was really great and I had a good time with it. And then a month or so ago, I rewatched the film again for this video, and now that I've seen The Last Wish many times, this movie just went down so much in my estimation. I think the obvious example of this movie not holding up after The Last Wish is through the animation. Now, the animation isn't bad in this movie by any means. In fact, I'd say it's really good. It's got great lighting, the scope of the settings and action scenes are very large and well done, and the direction is really strong and can be quite stylized at points, especially with the split-screen comic panels. Those are really unique. However, the character designs just feel so off now that I've gotten used to their more cartoony redesigns in The Last Wish. I did, however, get used to the older and more realistic look of Puss pretty quickly though, because I rewatched all the Shrek movies only a month or so before. But I just couldn't get used to OG Kitty. She just looks so bizarre by comparison. Now, it's obviously not this movie's fault that it looks cursed in comparison to The Last Wish, but it doesn't change the fact that I do struggle to go back to this movie with the more standard animation, after the amazingly stylized Last Wish. However, the animation isn't the only thing which hasn't held up well for me on a rewatch. The thing is, The Last Wish literally does everything that this movie did, but way better. Do you want a solo movie with Puss in Boots? The Last Wish is better. Do you want a fun adventure movie in the Shrek universe? The Last Wish is better. Do you want a Puss in Boots story with Kitty Softpaws instead of Dulcinea? The Last Wish is better. Do you want a movie mostly set in a desert? Well, if you're looking for that very specific requirement, then I guess you got the original movie to fulfill that. But for the most part, The Last Wish is just a superior choice of movie in every instance, and it makes the original movie just feel so lacking by comparison. I'd say that the biggest example of the original movie feeling lacking is also the biggest problem with the movie overall, and that's the plot. This is the one part of the movie which I wasn't big on even before my most recent post-Last Wish viewing, and the problem became even worse on the recent rewatch. To put it simply, the plot is a mess. Now, the first 2/3 of this film is fine plot-wise. It's really simple, but it works. It sets up Puss's motivation for partaking in the quest, and it explains his backstory well. I like how the first half is told in a more non-linear way, with the audience seeing Puss's disdain for Humpty before explaining why. It leaves the audience in suspense during the flashback scenes as they wait for that one moment where everything goes wrong for Puss. And then after that, the film flows quite well through the main adventure and is continually keeping the story interesting. But then we get to the third act, which kinda lets down the whole film as it is just so messy. I understand why Humpty wants revenge on Puss, as he was in prison for over 7 years. However, I just can't believe his plan. So he wants to set Puss up by luring him back to San Ricardo, where he gets arrested whilst Humpty gets the glory of paying back the town with the golden eggs. Okay, I'm with you so far. And in order to do that, Humpty hired various people to sit in the bar to tell Puss that Jack and Jill have the magic beans. However, Jack and Jill are also working for Humpty and only have the beans to attract Puss's attention and to eventually create a scenario where they kidnap Humpty and lure Puss back to San Ricardo. Once again, that does make sense. It's a little bit too overcomplicated, but I understand what he's doing. And then after all of that, he plans to destroy the town which he believed wronged him by using the Great Terror whilst he gets away and presumably gives back the Golden Goose after the town's destruction in order to prevent his own death. Again, maybe it's a little bit overcomplicated, but I still get what's going on. The problem is that the build-up and the resolution to Humpty's plan is what makes no damn sense. The thing is, there are very few hints revolving around Humpty's plan, to the point that when the twist happens, I am questioning so much. There are definitely still some hints throughout the movie of Humpty's hidden intentions though, like with his frustration with Kitty growing attached to Puss when she's also meant to double-cross him in the future. Not to mention, there's also this really subtle detail which shows a part of Humpty's plan. In the giant's castle, when they find the golden goose, Puss suggests just bringing a few eggs, whilst Humpty chooses to bring the whole goose. Kitty then sides with Humpty and also suggests to bring the whole goose, which thus makes it a 2v1 argument where Puss has to oblige. This scene was included because Humpty needed to take the goose away to attract the Great Terror to San Ricardo to destroy it, as he wouldn't be able to lure it away if he just took a few of the eggs. It's a clever little detail which adds a lot to the twist, I think. However, that's where my positives for the twist end. I've seen this movie so many times, and there's not even the tiniest hint that Jack and Jill could possibly be working for Humpty. It literally comes out of nowhere. I don't know about you, but the pair seemed very aggressive when fighting back, even though they need Humpty to succeed so he can pay them later, because let's be real, these two wouldn't be able to get the goose themselves. If this scene felt like they were holding back somewhat or putting on a show or something, then the twist with them would feel more believable. But as it stands, there's no real hint. Alongside that, when our trio fly away, we have this little scene with Jack and Jill afterwards.
I hate cats.
This is war!
This very much seems like they are declaring their revenge on our trio. But we know that they surely can't be when they're in cahoots with Humpty. And it's not even like they're putting on an act in this scene, as Puss obviously can't hear them. In the context of the movie before the twist, this little scene makes sense, but after the fact, it makes no sense at all. Plus, Humpty, May, why did you even need to set up this whole carriage action scene when you could just let Puss steal the beans on his own, and then afterwards get Kitty to steal from Puss, which would lead him to you, and then all of you work together to get the goose and return to the town? That would certainly be a lot less dangerous. Alright, so the build up wasn't the best, and sadly the execution of the twist isn't that much better. The thing is, I don't understand what Humpty's mindset is. Is he spiteful, remorseful, confused? Make up your mind. One minute he's furious at Puss, and the next minute he feels bad, and then he's willing to save San Ricardo after one pep talk from Puss. I don't know about you, but based on this confession, he showed no real signs of growing as a person, so why is he now suddenly leaving the dark side behind? I just feel like if you want to redeem a character, you just show more of their internal struggle on whether to help or harm throughout the entire movie. Whereas here it feels like they immediately redeemed him just to spice up the climax and make his sacrifice mean something. I just don't think it felt very natural or believable. Speaking of the climax and the twist with Humpty, I have to bring up the "I was always there" scene. Now, I genuinely don't know what to think of this scene. Is it meant to be taken seriously, or is it a parody of similar scenes in other movies, which is why it's so ludicrous and random here? Is it dramatic or comedic? I genuinely don't know. Whatever the intention was, it's the funniest part of the movie. If it was meant to be dramatic, it failed miserably. If it was meant to be comedic, then it passed with flying colours. So yeah, for me the climax really lets down the movie, and a large reason why is because it makes very little sense. Even though I loved the movie as a kid, I never did understand the final act and only ever rewatched the film for the first 2/3. However, there's another reason why I don't like the climax, and that reason is the fact that the final act takes up a good portion of the movie, around 30 to 40 minutes, which means that time had to be taken away from other parts of the movie. Most notably, time was taken away from the adventure. The main MacGuffin quest of the movie, as in the quest for the magic beans and the golden goose, is really disappointingly short. Surely the adventure part of this adventure movie is the main appeal, yet this movie spends a shockingly small amount of time on it. To put into perspective how short the adventure is, this movie is 80 minutes long if you cut out the credits, and I'd say that the main adventure starts at around the 30-minute mark with the trio preparing to get the beans from Jack and Jill. Then in my mind, the main quest ends as soon as they start dancing with the eggs. This happens 50 minutes into the movie. So the main adventure lasted a total time of 20 minutes, or 1/4 of the movie. That is nowhere near enough time for an adventure film like this, and the short length makes it so the quest is over before it really gets going. Now you could say that the character drama with Puss and Humpty is the core of the movie, so it makes sense to cut the quest to give more time to that, but as The Last Wish has proven, you can have character moments during the quest. That film's adventure lasted a lot longer than this film's, but it's still a great character moment. This film could have done the same. Maybe have some kind of crazy sky world our trio has to explore through with Jack and Jill chasing them after they climb up the beanstalk themselves, and then in this moment Humpty betrays Puss or something. But whatever happens, the focus should be on the adventure instead of slowing the pace of the film significantly for a half-baked third act twist. I feel like most people would enjoy this movie a lot more in spite of its flaws, if the adventure was longer and more fun, as it would have made the film a lot more enjoyable, because as it stands, a good chunk of the movie is lacking memorability. Alright, so I've been pretty critical of this movie up until now. Whilst I do have a lot of flaws with it, I do still enjoy it at the end of the day, so now I'm going to go over everything I like about the movie. First up, even though it's way too short, the main fairy tale adventure is a ton of fun to watch. Whilst this movie overall played the fairy tale stories like Jack and the Beanstalk a bit too straight for me, the adventure is easily the part of the movie which I had the most amount of fun with. The biggest example of this is the scene of the trio playing around in the clouds. It's a really simple, uneventful scene, but because of how wacky it is, it becomes a ton of fun. It becomes even more fun with the inclusion of high-pitched voices because of the thin air. That is really unique and is once again just fun. And then after this scene we have the main sequence in the Giant's Castle, which is continuously very engaging and tense, especially when the trio end up in the waterworks at the end. The scenes in the castle have the action sequences which feel the most different from the rest of the movie, and so it always stands out in my mind and is easily the part of the movie which shines the most. Alongside that though, the carriage chase, whilst making little narrative sense after the twist, is also a ton of fun. I am saying fun way too much. So much exciting stuff happens during this short segment of the movie, and it's just great to watch. I'd say the film overall easily peaks with the adventure. However, the adventure isn't the only great sequence from this movie. Puss's backstory is also really interesting. Not only does it contain a nice Doctor Who reference,
would you care for a jelly bean?
But it was also just really intriguing to see Puss and Humpty's relationship develop and then fall. The reason their relationship was interesting to see was because it all felt believable. They were both outcasts who showed each other kindness, which naturally led to their bond. You can really buy them as friends and brothers. Alongside buying their bond, we can clearly see that Puss is good at heart, whilst Humpty never really matured properly due to being regularly picked on and mistreated. It thus makes an interesting contrast between the characters, especially after Puss gets recognised as a hero after saving the Commandante's mother, whilst Humpty sticks to his life of crime and drags Puss down with him. It is quite upsetting to see Puss's life ruined by Humpty's refusal to change and mature. Although, if Puss really didn't want to screw over the town and wanted to give back the money, he should have just surrendered after scratching the Commandante, but I suppose you don't think rationally in stressful situations, so I guess I can forgive it. Oh, by the way, I just have to mention this now because it blew my mind when I found it out. Guess who plays the Commandante in this movie? Guillermo del Toro. Yes, that guy. The director of acclaimed films like Pan's Labyrinth and the 2022 Pinocchio. No, not that one. Or that one. There you go. And the reason why he's in this movie is because he was actually an executive producer on the film. So, the guy who helped make this movie also made the movie which beat out the sequel to this film at the Oscars. That's just wild. Anyway, I just went on a bit of a tangent there. Either way, I like the backstory. Also, Baby Puss is the cutest freaking thing ever. However, despite the fact that there are many great sequences, for me, my favourite part of this movie is the characters. They are what made me love the movie as a kid and are ultimately why I still like it now. Now, as you can probably tell considering the fact that I'm making this video in the first place, I absolutely love Puss in Boots as a character. I always love Puss not just because I think he's cool as hell, but also because I love his personality. His showmanship, his determination, his desire to do the right thing, as well as his energy and sense of humour all appealed to me as a kid. I admired him as a hero because he has strong moral values. Whilst he's an outlaw in this movie, his aim is to repay the town he wronged, and that is admirable. This fact doesn't just apply to this movie though, as he also tried his hardest to repay his debt in Shrek 2 after the king hired him to kill Shrek. Puss as a character is always willing to stand for what's right, and that's why I loved him in this film and why I still love him now. However, another reason why I love Puss now is because of his flaws. Now this point mostly applies to The Last Wish where he's a really flawed protagonist, but it does still kind of apply here. Puss is a character who makes mistakes a lot of the time. For example, he really shouldn't have trusted Humpty after he showed Puss his robbery plans. That was a big mistake on his part. However, the flaws make Puss feel a lot more three-dimensional and more interesting because, well, we all make mistakes. Overall, I love Puss because of his flaws, but I also love him because he is just so damn entertaining, whether it's for his dancing, his swashbuckling, or something as simple as constantly drinking leche instead of alcohol. That's always been funny. And then there's Kitty Softpaws, who, confession time, was my first of 2 cartoon crushes, with the other being Spider-Gwen.
Now don't worry, that was just a phase. I'm over it now. Just a phase.
However, outside of that fact, I also think Kitty is a really great character. While she has a lot more to her in The Last Wish, I still think she's interesting in this movie. First of all, I like seeing her gradually care more for Puss over the course of the film. At the start, she was hired by Humpty to lure Puss to the cat shelter thing, and is generally quite antagonistic towards him, especially during the dance fight sequence. Speaking of that sequence, I like how it was referenced again in The Last Wish through the return of Puss and Kitty defying gravity as they knock their boots together, and oh, I understand why they mentioned innuendos. You know, they're knocking boots. If you know, you know.
And don't look it up if you're a kid.
Anyway, after that sequence, Kitty starts to care more and more for Puss over time, and even opens up to him about her past. However, you can see at many points throughout the film how conflicted she now feels between her feelings about Puss and her job to help Humpty, and you can clearly see the guilt on her face when she betrays Puss, which shows how much she's changed and ultimately explains why she decides to help him. It's a great little character journey and is absolutely made even better thanks to her pitch-perfect dynamic with Puss. These two are just amazing together. They play off each other so well and have so many hilarious moments where they bounce off what the other one says.
But this does not make us even.
Freeze!
Yes, it does.
I saved you. You owed me one. You didn't tell me about Humpty. So now you owe me 2.
A lot of work.
I know, but I am worth it. Hit it!
Now we're even!
It's a very playful and enjoyable dynamic, and it's followed on expertly in The Last Wish. I think what helps with their dynamic is the fact that Antonio Banderas and Salma Hayek are good friends in real life who have frequently worked together in various films, ever since Robert Rodriguez's Desperado from 1995, a film I should probably watch at some point. Their real life dynamic absolutely aids this film and is ultimately why I love these two together so much.
A gang with a mask?
I don't need style advice from Mr. Dusty Boots.
The other characters in this movie are good, but definitely not as good as Puss and Kitty. Humpty's a character I'm kind of mixed on because of my aforementioned confusion with his plan. However, I do find his dynamic with Puss interesting, and he does have the occasional fun moment. He's a decent and entertaining character, but not really the best villain. And then there's Jack and Jill, who I don't think are in the movie nearly enough. They were definitely entertaining in the scenes they are in, and I love Billy Bob Thornton in anything he's in, so naturally I like Jack, but I think they need to do more to be really great. And the other characters in this movie aren't really that important. Mama Imelda is just kinda there, and I wish we saw more from her to develop a greater emotional hook, but she's alright. And then there's the Commandante, who's also just kind of okay, but as I said, he's voiced by Del Toro, which is pretty epic. Speaking of epic characters, I genuinely can't decide who the stand character of the movie is. For me, it's a toss-up between Andy Beanstalk, aka Jack, and the Ooh Cat. They are both legendary and generally provide me with the most joy in the movie, especially the Ooh Cat, who cracked me and my mum up every time. I legitimately cheered when he returned in The Last Wish. I really did. So yeah, this movie has some really great characters and also some decent characters who should have been in it a bit more. The final major positive I have to give to this movie is the music. Hot damn, this soundtrack is fire and the tracks always stick in my head. The backing flamenco music is especially great.
I always liked flamenco music.
It's terrible. It's just a bunch of notes in a row.
That's what music is!
Whilst The Last Wish is better than this movie in practically every way, the one part from this movie which is on par with the sequel is the music. I really do think that the soundtrack for this movie is that good. My personal favourite track is obviously the Puss Suite. It is an absolute earworm and is so great to jam out to. I've said it before and I'll say it again, but my least favourite part of The Last Wish is the fact that it didn't reference the Puss Suite in any way in its soundtrack. They didn't need to remix it, but a small reference to the main melody would have been nice. Anyway, that's basically everything I wanted to say in terms of my thoughts on this movie. In conclusion, I do still personally enjoy this movie, although it's not the greatest thing ever. It has a lot of flaws like the disappointingly short main MacGuffin quest and the messy conclusion, plus it is near impossible to go back to this movie after The Last Wish as the animation looks cursed by comparison, and everything in this movie is just weaker than the sequel. However, at the end of the day, I do still like this movie. Part of my enjoyment is down to nostalgia, but at the same time, the adventure, while short, is still fun, I really love the main characters, and in general, I love the vibe here. This movie tried very hard to not feel like a Shrek movie, and to instead be its own swashbuckling adventure story, and I really admire the change of direction. Whilst it didn't work entirely here, as the movie can feel a bit standard at points, it still has a lot of merit. This film does ride that fine line between being good and being mediocre, due to the pros and cons balancing each other out. However, I think there is enough merit here for it to be a bit more than just a movie that exists. It's not the greatest thing ever, but it's enjoyable, entertaining, fun, and a key part of my childhood. If I were to give the film a rating, it would probably be a low 7 out of 10. Not an amazing score, but definitely still on the more positive end. Although it's definitely gone down since my January viewing where I was a comfortable 8 out of 10. That really goes to show how much The Last Wish makes this movie seem worse by comparison. Anyway, that's enough of this movie. Even though I've already been talking for a while, we are nowhere near close to the end of this video, as there are so many other pieces of the Puss in Boots canon to talk about. Let's now move on to the short, which essentially acted as a sequel to Puss in Boots 10 years before the official sequel came out. Puss in Boots: The Three Diablos released 1 year after the original movie, and came as a bonus disc on various re-releases of the DVD. I got my DVD in 2011 though, so I obviously didn't get the short as a bonus disc. So instead, I had to watch this short through other means. Oh no, I didn't actually pirate it. Instead, I watched it on BBC iPlayer. Yeah, for some reason this short occasionally appears on iPlayer. I don't know why, but it doesn't matter, as when it came on a few months ago, I screen recorded the whole thing in case I ever needed it, and now I get to talk about it in this video. So this movie takes place right after the first movie, and is all about Puss returning a stolen gem from the notorious French thief, the Whisperer. However, in order to retrieve the gem, he has to get help from 3 troublesome kittens who used to work for the Whisperer. Yet over the course of the short, Puss is able to tame the kittens and brings them to the side of good, and they all work together to defeat the Whisperer. Now, obviously, this is only a 30-minute short film, so it feels unfair to directly compare it to the movie I just talked about and the TV show which I'm going to talk about later. Instead of being a complex narrative with deeper characters and whatnot, it's a simple, short narrative with a singular goal it wanted to achieve, and that goal was to be a fun and adorable little adventure to entertain you for 10 minutes. Therefore, I am going to judge this short on its own merits based on what it's set out to do, and in terms of those requirements, this short absolutely succeeded with flying colours, and here's why. So I'll just start by saying that whilst the story was obviously really simple, I still found it very entertaining. This is mostly thanks to the dynamics between the characters. Puss is really great here, as through his interactions with the kittens, we see all sides of him. We see his more aggressive side, but eventually we also see his softer and more caring side when he grows to understand why the kittens act the way they do. And then we see Puss essentially become their father figure as he teaches them his tricks and fully leads them to the path of good. It's honestly quite heartwarming to see. However, even before Puss starts to care for them, the dynamic between him and the kittens is hilarious due to the fact that Puss got completely owned by them. Actually, the funny dynamic leads me on to my next point, as I think that in general, this short is really humorous throughout. There is plenty of good jokes as well as some adorable moments which get a laugh out of me. The funniest part of the short for me though was when the Whisperer died and Puss just responded with,
Oh well, that's that.
That's kinda messed up, but it's hilarious. The final major thing I have to say about this short is that I really liked how much it tied with the first movie. Naturally, it makes sense to tie this short in considering the fact that it was an extra for that movie. However, I also think that the references help to tie into the narrative of Puss's story. Not only does this short help to show one reason for why Puss's reputation changed from an outlaw to a hero, which helps to aid the overall storyline of his character, but I love the way that Puss used his experiences from the first movie to help the kittens. He compares the way the Whisperer used the kittens to the way Humpty used him, and it helps the audience to understand why Puss connects and sympathizes with them so much. I feel like the references to the first movie aided Puss as a character in this short, which overall made the narrative more interesting, and thus the short itself became more interesting as a result, and it's just really great. There are also some other smaller points I have related to this short, like how the music is still great, the animation looks decent for a bonus feature, and I'm surprised but glad they were able to get Antonio Banderas back for this, because, as you'll see later, he's usually unable to come back for the bonus stuff, but having the OG voice actor here just makes everything feel complete. Anyway, that's basically everything I have to say about this short. Overall, the 3 Diablos is a simple and adorable little short which I definitely recommend checking out if you can find it anywhere. It's an entertaining watch with a good amount of humour and a surprisingly interesting story between Puss and the kittens. If all of this doesn't convince you to watch it though, then just look at the mini Puss outfits at the end. Oh my gosh, they're so freaking cute, how can you not want to watch it now? Anyway, now that I finished this quick little segment on a simple short, let's move on to easily the biggest segment of this video, the TV show. The Adventures of Puss in Boots is a Netflix original TV show which ran for 6 seasons and 77 episodes from 2015 to 2018. The show most likely takes place before the main events of the first movie, although it's never really explained. I'll explain my theories on when it takes place later though. The show is all about Puss settling down in the mystical town of San Lorenzo as its protector, where he fights off monsters, witches and mythical beings who invade the town. And he also fights off a lot of thieves who want the massive hoard of treasure in the town. The only problem with this was that Puss was the one who accidentally broke the magic seal around the town which previously protected it, which is ultimately why he chose to stay as the protector. That's the basic main plot of the TV show, but obviously other major plot points are introduced at varying points throughout the show. However, because of these wildly differing plot points, it's really hard for me to talk about the show as a whole package. Plus, the varying levels of quality over different seasons also make it hard to talk about together. As a result, instead of covering the show as a whole, I'm going to go one season at a time and talk about what happens, who the main characters of the season are, and what I thought of various episodes, as well as what I thought of the season overall. Now we've got a lot to cover in this segment, so let's immediately start at the beginning with Season 1. Season 1 of the show started things off strongly with a solid batch of 15 episodes, which makes it the longest season of the show by far. Compared to the other seasons, Season 1 doesn't actually have any major plot beats, outside of the basic plot beats left out in the first episode. Instead, this season is focused on introducing the characters and having a lot of simple, standalone and fun adventures. Before I get into what happens this season, I'm going to go over some general points which not only apply to this season, but the show as a whole. Let's start with the elephant in the room, the animation. Now, I can imagine that as a result of the footage shown, a lot of people are probably going to be put off the show because of the animation. I can understand why, to be fair, as it really isn't great. You think going from The Last Wish to the original film is cursed, try going from The Last Wish to this show. However, for me, I don't actually mind the animation. This is probably because I can personally enjoy things even if the animation isn't great. I mean, I am the biggest Paddock stan after all, and the animation there isn't exactly what I'd call appealing. Alongside that, I can also forgive the use of poor animation. It is a low-budget Netflix show at the end of the day, and all things considered, it could have been a lot worse. Honestly, the only major problems I have with the animation are the lighting, colour grading, and the occasional character designs. The rest is perfectly fine though in my opinion, although I hate every time Puss tries to do the cute eyes. At the end of the day, the animation still has expression to it, which is good because for me, stilted, awkward, and soulless animation is the worst thing any piece of animation could be. Here though, the characters can be very expressive. I always like the way characters like Puss and Dulcinea move their ears to show extra emotion. That's always fun and creative. Overall, whilst the animation was a bit off-putting when I first started watching, I got used to it pretty quickly. Now I'm going to go through all the significant main characters who first appear in this season. By the way, if a character doesn't really change much from season to season, I'll talk about them in their entirety right here and probably won't mention them again. Anyway, let's start with Puss, who isn't played by Antonio Banderas this time around. As you can imagine, recording a whole TV show is a big effort, and Banderas is a busy guy who understandably just doesn't have time for that, even if he does love the character. Instead of Banderas, Puss is played by Eric Bauza, who, in my opinion, does a pretty spot-on impersonation of Banderas' Puss voice.
I am Puss, in Boots, and I believe one solitary truth. When it comes to being a hero, there is no such thing as too much helping.
Obviously, when you know that Bowser isn't the original voice actor, you might notice slight differences here and there, but honestly, if I didn't know that Bowser was an impersonator before watching the show, I would have been convinced that Banderas did the show. I feel like some people completely write off the show just because there's no Banderas, but I'm here to tell you that Eric Bauza did a great job and you can easily get immersed in his performance pretty quickly. Anyway, as for the character itself, Puss is quite an interesting protagonist in this show, and this is because of his flaws. In this show, Puss is vain, arrogant, and his ego is larger than the sun. This fact leads me on to 2 points. The first point is that Puss's personality is probably my least favorite part of the show, alongside the various crap episodes. Whilst Puss being a flawed character is definitely good, as it makes him more interesting, or somewhat entertaining as we see him embarrass and humble himself, there are many points in the show where Puss's ego can become really irritating, which just makes Puss more unpleasant to watch than anything. Luckily, this isn't a problem just yet, as this is only the first season. As a result, I can excuse Puss being slightly unlikable in a few instances here, as he hasn't learned any lessons just yet and is still in the early stages of character development. Even then, his jerky moments are a lot more humorous in the season compared to a few others.
I can never say no to a woman.
Please pay your bar tab.
No.
On a more positive note though, I find Puss's character in this show quite fascinating, and the reason why is because this show redefined Puss's character. Think about it. In the Shrek movies and the original film, Puss can definitely be a bit arrogant at points, and the Shrek movies show him as a bit of a womanizer. However, he's nowhere near as vain as he is in this show. Obviously, this show decided to dial up Puss's flaws to create compelling stories where he has to learn lessons over a longer period of time to fit the length of a TV show. However, this is still very different to what Puss used to be like. Yet despite that, The Last Wish actually continued the path this show set up. Seriously, The Last Wish shows a Puss who's also vain and arrogant, and honestly feels like a byproduct of what the TV show created. I just find it quite interesting to consider that the greater emphasis on Puss's vanity and ego in later products can probably be traced back to what this show established. Anyway, Puss isn't the only character in this show, but I don't have as much to say about the others just yet. The second main character of the show is Dulcinea, played by Jayma Mays, who is Puss's main love interest in the show, and is literally talking Angela. No, seriously, she literally is. Just look at them. Now, Dulcinea is absolutely a character who gets better and better as the show goes on. However, in this season, she's a pretty standard and nice character, and not much more. She mostly exists to be the voice of reason for Puss, and this is mostly done through her reading rhymes from a book she always carries. Admittedly, this device can get a bit repetitive, and in general, Dulcinea doesn't really have much to her at this point. However, basically all of the aspects of her character improve over time. Whilst I don't care for her in this season, opinions will definitely change later. Next, I'll talk about the orphans, who I think are perfectly fine child characters. They don't really have much to them outside of what is established in this season, and mostly exist to occasionally help Puss out. Toby is okay, but he can get a bit grating at points, mostly down to the fact that he gets so much more screen time compared to everyone else. Having a character who massively idolizes Puss is a good idea on paper, but when this character appears so often and has the same personality in all of his appearances, it becomes a tad repetitive. Not to mention, the fact that Toby is always the orphan who joins in on side quests with the main characters is quite annoying when there are other orphans who could easily join in on an adventure instead as a way to develop some more and provide some variety in the groups of characters being brought along. Yet instead, this show just uses Toby every time and it's just kinda boring. Anyway, even though the show likes to forget this fact, there are other orphans besides Toby, so let's talk about them. I like Cleavel, She has a really interesting background where the villainous Duchess tries to manipulate her into portraying the main characters, and it made her a very fascinating but sympathetic character. Plus, she's quite unique amongst the rest of the cast due to being a goblin, at least until season 6, instead of a human or a cat or a pig. Not only does it provide variety in the aesthetics of the cast, but it also fuels an interesting conflict in her first episode, and leads to a different personality when compared to everyone else, as Cleve was a lot more abrasive and less innocent than the others. She's a fun character and definitely my favourite of the orphans. Anyway, did you know that Vina has basically nothing to her outside of saying "did you know" all the time? And did you know that Esme is just there to be the token cute character and not much else? Although to be fair, she does have some good lines here and there.
I saw the nurse put the kissy thief.
Kid, right? You saw nothing.
And then there's Kid Pickles, who is perfect, no notes, truly the most epic character ever made. Yeah, overall I'm a bit indifferent on most of the orphans. I like Cleveland a lot and Kid Pickles is legendary, but that's the extent of my feelings towards them. Anyway, most of the orphans don't really change that much throughout the show, so I probably won't talk about them again outside of mentioning a specific episode which they appear in. Now let's talk about the orphan's caretaker, Senora Zapata, who I hate. She is one of the most unlikable, annoying, horrible, and frustrating characters I've ever seen. I know that was the point of her character, and her constant hatred for Puss is meant to be a source of comedy, but I just find it more unpleasant than anything. There is a specific episode in the later season which encapsulates everything wrong with her, but in season 1 she's not much better, and she doesn't really change much throughout the show outside the odd episode in season 6. The only thing I do like about her character is the fact that she's the old lady who lives in a shoe. The reason I like it is because there's a shocking lack of nursery rhyme and fairy tale references in the show, so any small moment like this is welcome. Moving on from the worst character, we have my personal favourite character from the show, Artevius. I'd say that the best way to describe Artevius is this. Remember Merlin from Shrek the Third, that annoying, intrusive, painfully unfunny bimbo who I hate? Well, imagine that kind of character, but actually good, and you've got Artevius, a weird, silly, unstable wizard character. However, Artevius is actually by far the funniest character in the show. I swear, every single line from this guy just absolutely cracks me up.
What is it like inside your head, Artevius?
Wet and bloody.
The complete randomness of his character and his constant forgetfulness is just comedy gold. However, because you never know what he will come out with, he never feels repetitive. I imagine some people may find him annoying, but for me, I love him. Now there is a bit more to Artevius, but I'll get to that significantly later. For now though, I love him for the pure comedy. Now there are a few more main characters who consistently appear throughout the show, but I don't have as much to say about them. Bahuna is a really fun character throughout, but I feel like she only really comes into her own in later seasons. Mayor Temoroso is a funny character as well, and I like the barrel gags, but that's kind of the extent of my thoughts on him. He only really has one notable appearance, and that's in this season where he tries to become braver, but this plot point is kind of forgotten about soon after. There's also quite a few recurring villains and antagonists who first appear in this season. One of these antagonists is Jack Sprat, played by John Leguizamo of all people, who appeared a lot in this season, and is a former partner of Puss, but also a bit of a backstabber and a cheat. Now, I think he's a perfectly fine character, but I find it really strange that his many appearances in this season built him up like an important character, yet outside of one episode in season 2 and one cameo in season 4, he never appears again. I always find that really weird, and it kind of makes his appearances in this season feel a bit redundant in the long term. There are some other villains in the season as well, like the Duchess, who is definitely a really fun character. However, while she's a great antagonist, I think I prefer her when she develops and reforms into a hero in season 3. There's also El Moco, who is the biggest recurring villain from the show. However, he only appears in one episode this season, so I'm instead going to save my thoughts on him for next season. And with that said, I've covered all of the main characters this season, outside of a few extra people who I will mention when talking about the episode they're in. Don't worry, the character segments will become shorter and shorter as the seasons go on, as many of the characters don't change that much, so I won't have as much to add in the future. Anyway, now that I've talked about who are in these episodes, let's talk about what these episodes are actually about. As I alluded to before, this is the one season of the show to not really have any major overarching plot lines. There's no subplots, there's no grand multi-episode adventure, and there's no dramatic finale. Instead, this season is all about having fun, and honestly, I kinda like that for a first season. It's not trying to overcomplicate itself just yet, and is instead focused on setting up the main characters and settings. Now, I think moving away from this in later seasons was a great idea, as the show would have become boring very quickly if it stuck to this status quo. When it comes to introducing the show, I think this was a solid attempt. All things considered, it's not the most memorable season of the show, but it's definitely enjoyable nonetheless. What helps with the simple enjoyment of the season though, is the fact that I personally didn't think there were any really bad episodes. Yeah, I didn't particularly care much for either of the episodes with Toby's brothers, but outside of that, the other episodes were either solid or quite good. For each season of the show, I'm going to go through my favourite episodes from the batch so you know which ones I personally recommend checking out the most. So, here are my favourites from Season 1. I think that Hidden, the very first episode, is a really standard pilot episode which didn't really hook me into the show much. However, the second episode, Sphinx, was brilliant and absolutely hysterical. I was belly laughing so much, and I feel like I can credit this episode for convincing me to continue watching this show. Definitely a brilliant early episode. Fountains is also another hysterical episode with a lot of really creative ideas present through the use of various magical water fountains that the characters drink from, in an attempt to find the fountain of youth to help Puss's former mentor, El Guante Blanco, played by the legendary Jim Cummings. Yeah, that Jim Cummings. I think the idea of Puss having a mentor after his exile from San Ricardo made sense, as it explains how Puss became such an expert fighter who can master the sword and the spinning through the air thing. Some may call his inclusion a retcon, but I think it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, sure, Puss learned some skills in San Ricardo, but he clearly couldn't have developed that much skill on his own to be as good as he was in the main part of the film, so I think it makes sense they had some kind of mentor. Now, I didn't mention El Guante Blanco during the character segment because it was a lot easier to mention him here when talking about this episode. Plus, he's more important and more of his own character in Season 3, so I'll properly discuss him then. Anyway, from one episode featuring a character played by a celebrity to another, I'm now going to talk about the episode Sword, which I think I only rated this highly because Good Sword was played by Gimli himself, John Rhys Davis, for this episode and this episode alone. Although outside of that fact, it is still a fun episode which puts Daltonair in the limelight, and has an interesting conflict at the centre of it, due to the fact that the Good Sword's old wielder is the one who is corrupted by the evil scimitar. I'll explain more about the scimitar next season. And then there's Goblin, which I really like. Not just because I like Cleavel, but also because this was easily the best use of the don't judge a book by its cover message, which the show has used multiple times. The reason it worked in this episode though, was because the audience was actually made to care about Cleavel, more than any other character in future episodes similar to this, by showing how Cleavel is being manipulated by the Duchess. It makes a supposed betrayal more upsetting, but a redemption more satisfying. Although I will say that the Duchess's relationship with Cleavel really should have been brought up again at some point before Season 6. Like, I don't know, Season 3? The final episode I want to mention is Luck, which is coincidentally the final episode of the season. Now the main reason I really like Luck is because the three black cats are really fun characters with great chemistry, who should have been in the show some more.
Comrades, it hath been an honor to liveth, and now to dieth with you.
You know what? I'm okay with dying if it means I don't have to listen to you talk like that anymore.
However, the episode itself is creative, and the idea of taking the black cats cause bad luck stereotype literally was pretty clever. It's not as exciting as other finales from the show, but it's an enjoyable one nonetheless. So overall, Season 1 is a solid introduction to the show. It's enjoyable with some great episodes and not too many weak ones. However, it is a bit standard when compared to the rest of the show, so I don't have anywhere near as much stuff to say about this season when compared to the others. When thinking about the show, this season isn't exactly the first to spring to my mind. Either way, I still liked it. Anyway, let's move on to a season with a bit more for me to talk about. Season 2 continues the foundation left by Season 1, but also consists of significantly less episodes, with only 11, making it the shortest season of the show by far. However, don't let its short length deceive you, as there is a lot more going on this season compared to the first one. Whilst the arc and subplots for the season are nowhere near as interesting as the later seasons, it is still an enjoyable time overall. This season is mostly focused on trying to restore the magic spell which previously protected San Lorenzo, which Puss accidentally broke. Artavius needs time to figure out the spell, so in the meantime the characters collect all the artifacts they need. The main thing they need is a dowsing rod, which is useful for finding just about anything, and is often used in later seasons, but right now they need it to be able to locate and return every bit of missing treasure from the treasure room, as the spell won't work unless all the treasure is there. Greedy bastards. Where did all the money go, you might ask? Well, I don't actually know, as it wasn't explicitly stated, but I'm pretty sure it's implied that it was Jack Sprat's fault due to the incident with the tornado boots in the previous season, which I kinda neglected to mention. So overall, the main plot of Season 2 is simply find the missing treasure to restore the spell. Pretty simple overall, but I think it works for a shorter season. The main problem with this story though, is the fact that it literally takes half of the season before they start this plotline, and to be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of the first few episodes. Not only are those episodes just kinda naff, but they really feel like leftovers from season 1 instead of feeling fresh to go alongside the new season. Yeah, I'd say that the episodes are a bit of a mixed bag in this season, but before I talk about them, I'm going to talk about the characters from this season. Once again, we'll start with Puss. Whilst he isn't the deepest character just yet, this season does delve into some interesting aspects of his personality. For example, this season showed Puss's irrational fear of bees. Okay, that's not much, but giving a character an irrational fear is a very simple development, but it does make Puss a more relatable character, as we all have irrational fears like that, so we can somewhat sympathise with him. Also, before anyone says, there is a big difference between Puss's fear of bees and his fear of Santa Coloma, so his comment in The Last Wish about Santa Coloma being the first time he felt fear isn't a retcon after the show. Alongside his fear, we also see Puss's softer side at the end of this season. When the Great Mage Sino, who was the one who previously protected the town, shows up in the penultimate episode, he banishes Puss. As a result, we see Puss genuinely upset that he has to permanently leave his friends in San Lorenzo, which is why he's miserable when meeting with the Black Cats again. Side note, but I love that they redid the intro to the show but with depressed Puss and the Black Cats. That was really funny. I love when TV shows alter their intro and subvert it for a joke. Obviously the Sino in these episodes turned out to be a fake, so Puss could eventually return to the town, but nonetheless it was interesting to see how Puss has gone from being a proud nomad to someone who enjoyed his time settled down. Now obviously these extra character moments don't persist throughout the whole season, and we do still get lots of his OG personality. But like with season 1, his vanity hasn't gotten annoying just yet. He was a bit too stupid for my liking at some points though. I know Puss isn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but seriously, why the hell did you trust Jack and Fiji? Anyway, let's talk about the other characters which I have a lot less to say about. Just like with season 1, we have yet to fully see Dulcinea's true potential. However, I did really like what they did with her in the episode Scimitar. Basically, because I haven't explained yet, the Scimitar is the evil version of the Gimli Good Sword. Both swords give you power, but the Scimitar corrupts you and makes you evil. Kinda like the One Ring. Man, these are a lot of Lord of the Rings comparisons. Yet in this episode, Puss needs the Scimitar to find the Divining Rod, so gets Dulcinea to hold it as she is the most pure of heart. This episode is great because it shows how much good Dulcinea has, as it takes the sword forever to corrupt her, and even by the end, Dulcinea is still able to overpower it. It's not the greatest showcase of character ever, but it does a good job showing her pureness, I feel. As for the other characters, Artavius is still a legend, and I like the idea of making the orphans a part of the Junior Puss Squad, even though they kind of forget about it in later seasons. As for the villains, I realise that I've neglected to mention Fartholomew Fishflinger, who's this evil being who can take people's souls and can change forms, but is mostly in the form of a mouse. He's okay. He was introduced in season 1 in the episode Mouse, which is an episode I didn't really have much to say about, and he comes back in this season as the fake Sino. But overall, I never really cared much for him, so I don't have much to say. I did like how annoyed he got at Artavius' incompetence though, that was pretty funny. Whilst technically not a villain, there's also the Mole King, who is also just kind of alright. Like, I find him a bit annoying at points to be honest, and he's nowhere near as good as Jake, or Bender, or Wrath, in terms of John DiMaggio roles. However, he's not painful to watch, and more so just okay. And then there's El Mocco, who I'm going to talk about more this time because he has multiple appearances this season. El Mocco is basically the head bandit and the villain who reappears the most throughout the show, and he is a really entertaining antagonist. I love how throughout the show we always see him thwarted by Puss, whilst he very rarely gets the upper hand. It's funny because this big strong bloke is being bested by a cat and shoes. I also love the box jokes with him. The thing is, he's one of those villains who's funny to watch, but at the same time he does pose a legitimate threat, but he's not exactly a proper villain in the grand scheme of the show. Now, if you think that El Mocco's character design looks a bit familiar, it's because he was very clearly modelled off of his voice actor, Danny Trejo, and if Danny Trejo looks familiar, you may have seen him in various films and TV shows, but I think most general audiences will recognise him as the guy from Breaking Bad who had his head on the tortoise. And the final character I mentioned for this season is Uli. This German stereotype? I honestly don't know what to think of Uli. The initial twist of his evil intentions is actually kinda cool and does make him an interesting character, but at the same time I can find him quite irritating at many points and he just generally isn't the best character ever. Alright, that's it for the major characters. Now on to the episodes. As I said earlier, this season is quite a mixed bag in terms of episodes. Unlike season 1 where the weakest episodes were ones I felt quite numb to, this season has a few episodes that I actually dislike. I'll start with the bad episodes so we can end this segment on a more positive note. The first bad episode is the second episode, Moles. The problem with it is the fact that Puss is an idiot in this episode. Seriously, did you not think that Jack Sprat was going to steal the Mole King's Ballie? How dense are you? Also, on the subject of the moles, I don't like Sphere either because it's boring and played out. Then there's Mermaid, which is an infamously bad episode of the show, as proven by the fact that it has the lowest IMDb rating of the whole show. Yeah, I can see why. It's so annoying! I hate any story with a clingy crush, and Fiji is absolutely one of those characters, so it makes the whole episode a chore to sit through. Not to mention it's made worse by her irritating voice and that frickin' banshee scream she always does. I wanted the episode to be over every 2 minutes, and that's not a good thing at all. And finally there's Spell, which I should like because it's an Artevius episode, but once again, Puss is way too stupid for my liking in this episode. I know it's hard to deal with a giant owl house thing, but surely your first thought should be to not piss it off, yet Puss is too stupid to listen to reason and is constantly insulting the damn thing, which is causing it to become aggressive. Come on, I could deal with Alberto better and I'm a weak as hell socially awkward human. Anyway, that's about it for the bad episodes. Let's get on to the really good episodes, which do help make up for these flaws somewhat. Let's start with Bees, which is honestly so much fun throughout. I like the subversion of having the men not be afraid of the bees, and as I said before, it's interesting to see Puss's irrational fear. Squad is another great episode because it actually gives all of the orphans a chance to shine, and not just Toby. I also already mentioned Scimitar, which is not only a great episode for Dulcinea, but is overall really unique due to being all about Dulcinea trying not to kill Puss. Stories is also a really unique idea for an episode due to being all about the orphans lying about Puss's ability to a sky god, and tricking the sky god into being afraid of Puss. It's a really fun idea and I'm glad it's brought up again in later seasons. And then we have the final 2 episodes, which are both fantastic. C is mostly a really enjoyable and fun Duchess episode, with the characters going after the coin from the very first episode which Puss nicked, but No is one of the most epic episodes of the whole show. So many people get involved in the final fight, from the citizens to the orphans and even the black cats, who sadly never appear again afterwards. The episode as a whole just has a really large scope to it. It definitely felt more like a season finale than Luck from season 1, and it's topped off with a really strong cliffhanger. Thanks to these great final episodes, I think it leaves the season with a better taste in your mouth, and certainly leaves me rating the season slightly higher than I would normally. So overall, I probably best describe season 2 as mixed. It's got some great developments from season 1 and quite a few really solid episodes, but it takes a while to get going and is let down by quite a few naff to painful episodes. As a result, I'd have to say that I think this season is a bit of a step down from season 1. It's not a massive step down, but I definitely didn't enjoy it as much. Sadly, the next season won't help matters, and will instead be less of a step down and more of a nosedive off a cliff. Let's just get this over with. Season 3 consists of 13 episodes. It's a nice middle ground between the lengths of seasons 1 and 2, and it's a consistent number of episodes for the next few seasons as well. This somewhat consistent number of episodes is the only substantial thing to come out of season 3 though, as on the whole it is as bad as Gone Off Leche. No, I'm not exaggerating, I absolutely hate this season. So much so that if Shrek the Turd didn't exist, this would be the worst mainline thing to come out of the Shrek universe. Seriously, it's that bad. The main plotline for this season follows up from the cliffhanger to season 2. Uli betrays everyone and summons the statue of the Bloodwolf under San Lorenzo, which means that in a few months, the Bloodwolf will arrive in the world and destroy everyone. As a result, this season, as well as season 4, is focused on Puss trying to stop the Bloodwolf's arrival. Yeah, this is a 2-season arc, and boy does it feel like it takes up 2 seasons. The Bloodwolf arc is the definition of dragged out. Whilst this may seem like a problem with both seasons, it impacts season 3 more because the build up here is just so aimless. There are 2 main plot points in the season. The first is all about Puss and Dulcinea recruiting people to join the Avengers initiative to get Uli, who has been captured by the moles, so he can tell them how to defeat the Bloodwolf. The second arc is all about Puss joining a group of sky pirates to find some crown they need. That's basically all there is to the season. What's worse is the crown doesn't even work without a gem being added to it in season 4, so that makes the crown plotline feel like it meant nothing. So yeah, by the end of this season, it really feels like nothing happened at all. What also doesn't help with this aimless feeling felt by the end is the fact that this season also has a terrible pace. After the first major storyline, the senior Puss squad is formed and Uli is in the hands of Puss. And then there's 3 completely filler episodes back to back. It just feels like this season keeps forgetting that the status quo of the show should be different because of the looming threat of the Bloodwolf, so there shouldn't be random filler episodes. The characters are on the clock to save the town, yet instead they're just dawdling around for 3 episodes. I know they're trying to get information out of Uli in this period, but it's kind of hard to remember this significant plot point when Uli isn't even in some of these episodes. It's hard to feel the stakes when the characters don't seem to be trying their hardest to get information from him. Furthermore, they let Uli out of his cage as that's the only way for him to spill information, yet surely doing this would lead to some sort of repercussions, like when he tried to poison everyone in Copycat. Yeah, he mistakenly used pepper instead of poison, but he did still try to kill everyone. He can literally do anything out of the cage. He could blow up the whole town if he wanted to, yet no one seems to care about the possible danger he poses. It's stupid. So yeah, the plot lines this season feel pretty aimless, and the contrast between the plot episodes and filler episodes is really bad, and completely kneecaps the pacing. Now, having a weak plot and poor pace is a problem, but that's nowhere near the worst part of this season. The characters this season also ruin the whole experience. As I've said before, Puss's stupidity and arrogance can sometimes go a bit too far, to the point that it's just unenjoyable. Well, this season is the absolute epitome of that. Puss is consistently an absolute twat this season, and he completely loses any relatability or entertainment. One of my biggest pet peeves with any TV show are when characters have to keep relearning the same lessons that they have learned from previous episodes. These characters should know better, yet they always regress so that new plot points can happen. This happens in a lot of shows, but most commonly happens in kids shows like this, because these shows more often than not feature moral lessons for the kids, so they need a flawed character to learn that lesson. This is a problem which often rears its ugly head by the second or third season of a show, and The Adventures of Puss in Boots is no exception. By season 3, Puss is relearning lessons left, right and centre. However, it feels so much worse in this show compared to a few others, because Puss is relearning lessons he already learnt in the previous episode! The assembly of the Senior Puss Squad storyline could have been really fun, but is instead dominated by an annoying formula which ruins everything. In all of these episodes, Puss meets one of the members, or someone related to one of the members, gets jealous, tries to one-up them, and then learns to not be so jealous and full of himself. And then he forgets about all of that in the next episode, and it's just so annoying that happens! Whilst future seasons of the show also have moments of Puss progressing in character, it at least doesn't happen so often, and especially doesn't happen in back-to-back episodes. So yeah, Puss ruins the first story. But is he any better in the pirate story?
Oh no!
Whilst you could argue that Puss can still feel kinda relatable in the first arc, as we've all been jealous at some point in our life, Puss in the pirate story is just a straight up bellend and can't be sympathised with at all. He doesn't care that the captain, whose name I don't care to learn, is depressed, and instead just calls himself the captain and treats the other pirates like dirt and becomes reckless on the wheel, and it once again ruins this storyline. The most that Puss is likeable in this season is in the final episode, Skeleton Town, where he's willing to let the skeletons stay in San Lorenzo. However, it's also ruined by the fact that the other characters this season are also unlikable. Throughout this episode, everyone is just racist to the skeletons, all because they find them a bit creepy. Come on, why are you being racist? They're not hurting anyone. I know the episode is trying to give a message about prejudice, so it makes sense to make some of the characters dicks, but I feel like this episode just takes it way too far at points. I mean, for goodness sake, Bahuna yeets Puss out of the cantina because he brought in the skeletons. I'm supposed to like her, so why would you make her unlikable as well? What's worse is that she never apologizes to Puss for chucking him out. He was probably hurt in that moment just as much as the skeletons. Also, why were characters like Dulcinea also being prejudiced? Surely she of all people would be willing to give the skeletons a chance. Although to be fair, whilst this episode butchered Dulcinea, she's still developing in this season and is very nearly at her full potential. She became a lot more assertive in this season and was quicker to call out Puss at points. The best example of her continued development though, is in the episode of Scapegoat, where she has to take charge and rescue the Senior Puss Squad. We see in this episode that she can command a group of people well, and it definitely helps to add to her character. The only problem with this development in this episode is that this is season 3 of The Adventures of Puss in Boots, so that means that we can't have nice things. A Scapegoat may have a good Dulcinea, but the other characters are twats, which ends up ruining the episode once again. So, in this episode, Puss is trying to lead his squad into the Mole Kingdom to get back Uli. However, Puss isn't the best leader and is being too passive instead of assertive with everyone. Obviously, the message of the episode is that you can't be overly nice if you're going to be a good leader. However, the episode only makes it out like it's Puss's fault, when it really isn't. The other members of the squad were all being horrible and childish. It was their own fault that they got trapped as they were arguing over stupid things like who gets to go first in the line. And then after getting trapped, the whole group has the audacity to just say,
You are a terrible leader!
Here's an idea. How about you own up to your own stupid mistakes? Bellends. Actually, talking about that episode leads me on neatly to talking about the members of the Senior Puss Squad, and I should probably say who's actually in the team. So first up in the group there's El Guante Blanco, who is no longer old and weak as he's been paired up with Goodsword, who's now played by Jeff Bennett instead of John Rhys Davis, and Goodsword gives El Guante Blanco extra power. Now, these characters are a good pairing, but because this is season 3, I feel like they kind of lose some of their appeal later on when they just become dumber and dumber as the episodes go on. They're still enjoyable though. Another member of the team is the Sphinx, who joined Puss as San Lorenzo's guard after her introduction in season 1, and appears semi-regularly throughout the show before becoming a squad member. I haven't yet talked about the Sphinx, but I think the best way to describe her is this diva street girl, I guess? I thought that she would get annoying fast, but you know what? I actually find her quite funny because she is such a freaking mood, it's great. And then there's the Golem, who was also introduced in season 1 before returning as a squad member here. He's also one of few characters to be played by Mario movie comic himself, Kevin Michael Richardson. I personally really like Golem. He's a unique character due to being an unwilling antagonist at some points, and this is because he always has to do what is written in his mouth. This means that he sometimes has to fight Puss if someone tells him to, even if he doesn't want to. It's an interesting idea for a character, and even when it's no longer a major part of him, he's still entertaining throughout because he's often really funny at points. Speaking of funny, there's the Duchess, who becomes a fully reformed villain in this season. Partway through the season, the Duchess mentions how she hates the Blood Wolf more than Puss, so they decide to make a truce and work together. Yet whilst it starts out as a truce, the Duchess ends up permanently turning to good. While she was a great villain, I personally find her even better as a secondary protagonist. The reason she's better now is because she not only gets to keep all her unique magical abilities from before, of using the souls of various wizards to create spells, but she also gets more interactions with Artevius due to being a hero, and she overall feels really unique when compared to the rest of the squad as a result of her spotty background. The only problem with her change is the fact that in this season, they never address the fact that she previously manipulated Cleavel, which is something I previously mentioned. She comes back to work with our heroes, and Cleavel doesn't seem to care. Come on, that's a missed opportunity right there. An episode where Cleavel tries to get revenge on the Duchess and break the truce behind Puss's back would be a far more interesting episode than Kid Pickles becomes king. Do you see why I hate this season so much? Every time season 3 does something right, it finds a way to still mess it up. Anyway, that's it for the major players this season. Well, almost. There's some other characters worth mentioning, but I'll talk about them when I talk about the episodes they're in. But overall, I felt like a lot of the characters this season went backwards, especially Puss. Even members of the squad became dumber as the season went on. So, season 3 feels uneventful, has terrible pacing, and butchers a lot of the characters. But surely the episodes themselves aren't that bad, right?
You serious?
Of course the episodes are bad. I wouldn't hate this season as much if the episodes were at least entertaining, but they're not! I'm gonna be honest when I say this, but in my opinion, around 80% of the really bad episodes from the show are in this season alone. It is constantly just miss after miss, so much so that it's quicker to tell you the episodes I did like compared to the episodes I didn't like. And that's because there was only one episode this season that I somewhat enjoyed, and that was Coin Toss. Which is ironic considering the fact that it's the lowest rated episode of this season on IMDb. Yes, Coin Toss isn't perfect, as it is a filler episode and it's the first to not feature Uli after he was let out of the prison, so I'm left wondering what he's doing the whole time. However, I found the episode quite funny and it had a good message on the dangers of gambling. Compared to the rest of the show, it's nothing special. However, it looks like the frickin' Last Wish when compared to the rest of this season, so as a result I rate it a lot higher in my mind. Actually, I take that back. I just remembered that I also like Copycat because Puss Dose is funny and Artevius has some good lines.
And you're certain that this twin me will not turn out to be evil?
Just as certain as I am that chickens come from the moon!
What?
The rest of the episodes, though, are just crap. The first 2 episodes with the moles are really boring, honestly, as it just consists of constant arguing, shouting, and a tepid courtroom segment.
I do believe he's telling the truth.
You can't handle the truth!
And then after those episodes, we have the Assembling the Squad arc, which is entirely ruined by Puss's constant regressive jealousy. This is then followed up by the squad acting like dicks in a scapegoat, which ruins that episode, and then we have a load of filler episodes, which I already explained my problems with. And then, after all of that, we have the Pirate arc. Good lord, the Pirate arc. The Pirate arc is the absolute low point of the show for me. I can't stand any of it. To give some perspective of how bad I think the episodes in this arc are, my favourite episode from this batch was the one where frickin' Fiji came back. Yeah, the rest of the episodes are so bad that Catfish was the best of the bunch, despite also being kinda naff. There are just so many layers to what makes these episodes so bad. I've already mentioned it before, but Puss lets down these episodes massively because of how unlikable he is. But that's not actually the only problem here, unlike with the first storyline this season. The other pirate characters are some of the blandest characters this show has ever created. Aside from the captain, who is more so annoying because of his constant moaning, these pirates are basically what you think of when you think of a stereotypical pirate, and nothing more. They are boring and unmemorable. Yet despite that, the episodes expect you to care about them because they become the only main characters for Puss to interact with in these episodes. Yeah, that's the main reason these bland characters don't work. Puss has no one else to bounce off of outside of these blank slates because no one else from San Lorenzo joined him on his pirate quest. Not even Dulcinea. If Dulcinea was there, these episodes would be a lot more bearable as she could put Puss in his place and provide an interesting contrast of all the other pirates, because she is about as far away from a pirate's personality as you can get. But instead, Puss is alone and it makes the character dynamics hollow and the episodes just boring. However, what's even worse is this season couldn't make do with just forgetting about the San Lorenzo citizens for a bit. Oh, no. Instead, it did include them, but instead of including them in a natural way which aids the story, like by having them join Puss, they are instead included in these random B-plots which ultimately lead to nothing. All they do is break the pace of the episode and bore me even more. This is the reason why Catfish is the least bad of the trilogy. It doesn't cut to a pointless B-plot unlike the other episodes. What's worse is that the two B-plots featured are both really bad even when you look at them on their own. The first one in Pirate Booty is just uninteresting. It is literally just the senior Puss squad having a slumber party. How riveting. Yet the other one contains arguably the single worst moment from the entire show, and that is really saying something. I mentioned before that I hate Senora Zapata. Well, the episode Parrot Booty was the main reason why I hated her. In this episode, the senior Puss squad decided to practice their skills whilst Puss was away. In doing so, they end up scaring the orphans. Zapata gets mad at them, and so they apologise, but because this season loves derailing characters, they're all idiots and they end up scaring the orphans again. Now, if you're Zapata in this scenario, you probably get mad again. That's reasonable. You probably tell them to stay away from the orphanage. Fair enough. Yet instead, Zapata does the perfectly logical thing of banishing the squad from San Lorenzo! I'm sorry. What the actual cuss? First of all, it was very clearly a mistake. Why are you being such a stuck-up bint about it? Second, Puss needs the squad to help him with various goals like, I don't know, defeating the Blood Wolf? You can't just kick them out. What if Puss needs them as soon as he gets back? I know you hate Puss, but you're endangering the whole town because of your actions. And finally, who the cuss gave you the authority to banish people? You're just the orphanage lady, you have no power. This is something only the mayor could do. Now, you could say that Zapata didn't mean it literally, but no matter how you slice it, it was still way too extreme and just pissed me off so much that I legit had to pause the episode for a solid 5 minutes just to recover. It didn't help that this plotline was contrasted with a snooze fest of a pirate adventure before being followed up by Skeleton Town, which was also crap because of the twatty townspeople as I previously mentioned. Yeah, the end of this season was tough to get through, and it's the closest I came to stopping with the show altogether. I'm not even joking. Obviously I stuck it out in spite of this, and I'm very glad that I did stick with it, as you will hear soon, but I just can't get over how terrible this end was. So overall, Season 3 of the show is absolutely dire and I genuinely can't stand it. It's only better than Shrek the Third because it at least didn't ruin the franchise in the eyes of the public. Plus it has Artebius while Shrek the Third as Merlin, so it's definitely an easy win here. But outside of a few small good moments here and there, this season was mostly just painful. The characters derailed harder than Gordon, the episodes are so unbelievably boring, and the pacing murders any stakes which the season aimed to try and build up. In total, this season just left me completely miserable and frustrated by the end, and left me dreading the upcoming seasons as I assumed they would continue with this downward trajectory. Thankfully, the poor quality brought by Season 3 was just a phase. Season 4 is actually good. Hallelujah! Hallelujah! I just had to say this immediately to make myself feel better after the slog I just went through. Anyway, Season 4 once again consists of 13 episodes, and thankfully, as evident from before, these episodes are infinitely better than what came just before it. Alongside the superior episodes though, the main overarching plot this season is so much better than Season 3's. As I mentioned before, the Blood Wolf arc extends over 2 seasons instead of just 1, and whilst it felt pretty aimless and without stakes in Season 3, in this season it mostly feels a lot more impactful. A lot of the reason why is down to the fact that there are quite a few different storylines in this season, and they all help to aid the overarching story. The first storyline is all about trying to find the pieces of a gem from 3 witches to help power the crown from last season. The second story is about finding information on the obelisk, an object which is said to be used to help defeat the Blood Wolf. And the final story is all about finding the obelisk itself and using it to defeat the Blood Wolf. Or so it seems. Now what makes these stories work so much better than the ones from Season 3 is the fact that not only are the episodes better as previously mentioned, but the pacing also feels better for the most part. With the exception of one episode in the middle of the season, which I'll talk about later, there doesn't really feel like there are any true filler episodes in this season. Even an episode like Board Games, which should seem like a filler episode as it's separate from the main narrative, still fits within the season because it predominantly shows Puss trying to find the obelisk. It helps to aid the continuity and the overarching story feels greater and more eventful as a result, whereas Season 3 just plonked in other random episodes without any care for continuity. Now I wouldn't say the storylines this season are perfect, as they can be a bit repetitive at points due to the fact that they're all fetch quests without much variety. However, I don't mind that much as they're still enjoyable nonetheless. What helps with their enjoyment is the fact that the characters are actually likeable once again. Whilst Puss obviously still has his arrogance at points and it can sometimes get quite annoying, he's generally a lot better in this season. He's a lot more entertaining, especially in episodes like Prey Time where he has to survive on an island on his own, but he also has more relatable moments once again. Near the end of the season, he thinks that he's lost Dulcinea and becomes devastated at this loss. Alongside that though, we also see him absolutely furious at Uli for tricking everyone into thinking the obelisk could work. Oh yeah, Uli pretended to redeem himself in this season and so tricked everyone into using the obelisk, but it was actually the obelisk which was needed to summon the Blood Wolf. It's a bit of a confusing plot point to be honest, but I'll talk more about it later. However, we also see how determined Puss is to win against the Blood Wolf and save everyone. It's easier for the audience to understand his sheer determination to succeed in this instant compared to any other, as he's not only fighting a more dangerous foe, but he's also avenging a friend, and it helps us care for Puss more. Overall, the dramatic moments with Puss's character are often the highlights of the whole show, and the end of this season is absolutely no exception. Anyway, I've talked about Puss quite a lot because he is obviously the main character. However, I haven't talked that much about Dulcinea up until now. Well, as I've mentioned many times before, Dulcinea wasn't really that deep or interesting in the earlier seasons, but I alluded to the fact that she gets better. Well, I'm now here to tell you that Dulcinea fully comes into her own and becomes truly fantastic from this season onwards. Whilst in previous seasons Dulcinea was mostly the nice character who put Puss in his place from time to time, in this season we see a lot more variety in her personality. First of all, we see a lot more humour from her, like when she gets turned into Puss in Familiar Feeling and basically starts mocking him. It's absolutely hilarious. However, alongside that, we also see a more snarky version of Dulcinea where she falls into the sarcasm fountain in Small Change, which completely changes her personality. That was also absolutely hilarious and was a good way to subvert her character without derailing it. Not to mention, while she has done heroic things in previous seasons, Dulcinea starts to feel like a true hero in this season, especially in the finale where she is not only the chosen one who has to use the obelisk, which is something also brought up again in the future season but I'll talk about it later, but she is also the one who ultimately defeats the Blood Wolf by bringing the amulet from the Realm of Shades to use on the Blood Wolf, and is even willing to trap herself in the realm forever until Uli swoops in to save her. However, my favourite addition to Dulcinea is the dynamic with the author of the book she always carries around, Miguela. I'll go more into detail later when I talk about the episode specifically, but I'll just say now that she meets Miguela and learns how her favourite book isn't actually that good. As a result, in later seasons there's a running joke where Dulcinea will read a rhyme from the book like usual, before realising that the rhyme isn't actually very good.
Should your wife bear you a twin, cast him out, he's rife with sin. Oh my, that's a really terrible message. Bad book.
It's a really fun subversion to what had been the norm up to that point. So yeah, Dulcinea is really great now. This begs the question though, Dulcinea or Kitty Softpaws? Who do I prefer? This is a really tough question as I think both characters are great in their own way. However, for me personally, I think I slightly prefer Kitty because I find the love-hate relationship between her and Puss more fun and more interesting narrative-wise when compared to the more caring relationship that Puss and Dulcinea have, even though that's still great. I just want to give my opinions on this topic now, but please don't let it take away from what I'm saying about Dulcinea as I do still think she's a great character. As for the other characters, they are great and fun once again. Artavius is still a legend and I love his dynamic with the Duchess. They're always great to see together and the main reason why is because the pair actually have a bit of a romantic relationship, and that just leads to some comedy gold with the Duchess infatuated whilst Artavius is just lost. Their dynamic is what makes the first storyline with the witches so damn enjoyable. However, speaking of that storyline, it was interesting to get some backstory for the Duchess with her sisters. Because she was in the middle of developing as a character, it made sense to give us some depth, and I think it was a neat little twist. Speaking of characters getting a bit more depth, there's Pahuna. Now, I mentioned with Season 1 that I did really like Pahuna, at least until Skeleton Town, however, I didn't really have much to say about her. All I really had to say was that there was a shocking amount of, well, these kinds of jokes.
This should be enough, Leche, even for a dragon.
However, in this season, we find out a bit more about her past. There are a few hints in previous episodes which relate to what Bahuna's past could have been like, but in the episode Board Games, we finally get more information with the introduction of Roz, her former partner. We see how the pair of them went on many adventures together before Bahuna made a serious mistake and accidentally betrayed Roz, so decided to settle down in San Lorenzo to run the cantina instead. I think this backstory given to her works because it not only adds a lot to her character and makes her more interesting, but it also provides an explanation for why she is so skilled at fighting despite being a simple barkeeper. I mean, I know barkeepers need to keep their wits about them, but not this much, so it makes sense that she used to fight all the time in her youth. Next, I'll talk about Uli again. Now, I didn't mention him in Season 3 because I had nothing substantial to say about him. All I could think of was that he was more annoying when he was evil compared to when he was good, so I guess he was worse in Season 3. No surprise there. But in this season, Uli is shown to be trying to redeem himself, before betraying everyone again in the finale. You already pulled off a twist with his evil intentions once, you don't get to do it twice as that just feels cheap more than anything. Although I do like the idea of having him actually feel bad for being responsible for Dulcinea's supposed death, despite being evil all along. It makes him feel like a more believable character, and that, plus the Blood Wolf's betrayal, helps to nicely lay the foundations for his later sacrifice where he saved Dulcinea and the town. I just wish his main twist wasn't so played out. Anyway, that's it for the main characters, so now I'm going to talk about a few other characters this season. I really like Miguela because I find her dynamic with Dulcinea really hilarious, as I previously alluded to. However, I also like her because I'm someone who does a lot of writing in my free time for these videos, so I relate to any writer character like her. And finally, I want to mention Trunch the Ogre. Yes, an ogre. The reason I want to mention him isn't because of his character, as I have very little to say. He's just okay, maybe a tad annoying, but that's the extent of my thoughts on him. Instead, I'm mentioning him because one of my biggest disappointments with this show is the fact that it didn't fill in all of the gaps in Puss's story. Yes, it explained why he's so skilled through the introduction of El Guante Blanco, and this show was most likely used in The Last Wish to explain why Puss always travels alone and hasn't settled down properly, more on that in Season 6, but this show never explained why Puss was known as an ogre slayer by the King of Far Far Away. Apparently the original Puss in Boots film was meant to be released as a direct-to-DVD film called Puss in Boots: The Story of an Ogre Slayer, which would have tied into Puss's reputation in Shrek 2. Then when that film was replaced by the theatrical 2011 film, the ogre connection was changed to be a fight between Puss and a giant ogre in a similar vein to the opening of The Last Wish, which would have appeared as the climax of the original film. At least allegedly. I haven't been able to double check this fact, so take it with a pinch of salt. Either way, when there were no ogres in the original film, I expected this show to have an ogre character that Puss would slay, and got really excited when Trunch appeared. Yet Puss never slays an ogre of any kind, and that really bugs me. When are they going to have the Puss ogre slaying story which ties in with Shrek 2? Also, speaking of Shrek, there's a shocking lack of references to him through Trunch. I just assumed there'd be more because this is ultimately a Shrek spin-off. Although to be fair, there was this great line.
I hope you will be the last ogre I ever meet!
Anyway, whilst the characters have improved from last season for the most part, the main reason Season 4 is so much better than Season 3 is because the episodes are so much better, and a few of them are some of my favourites from the whole show. There are definitely still a few naff episodes like Little Lamb where the only thing I liked about it was the fact that we finally had another nursery rhyme or fairy tale reference with Mary Had a Little Lamb. Oh, and there was also Breaking Good, which is nowhere near as good as Breaking Bad, as it is not only boring, but also completely breaks the pacing of the season, due to the fact that some of the episodes were shown out of order, with Breaking Good being shoved in between the two episodes with Miguela, which means that it doesn't even make narrative sense in the grand scheme of things. However, outside of those two, the episodes are mostly good this season. The season starts strong with a really fun witch trilogy. Whilst I enjoy all 3 episodes, the highlight is easily In Dreams, which is so damn creative and unique. I'm a sucker for a good dream episode, and this episode is another example of a fantastic one. It's wacky, it's tense, and it's easily a favourite of mine from the whole show. Pray Time is another really fun episode and a great Castaway homage. It's hilarious seeing Puss alone on the island as he fails miserably to sustain himself before going crazy and talking to a coconut. However, alongside the funny Puss stuff, the parts with the other characters going crazy trying to find him were also hysterical. And then we've got Written By. You know, out of all the stories I expected a kids show to pay homage to and potentially parody, Misery isn't exactly at the top of my list. Yet we have this episode, an episode where Dulcinea meets her favourite author and goes, for the lack of a better word, absolutely insane. She ties Miguela up and forces her to write a sequel to her favourite book, despite the fact that Miguela hates that book and makes no secret of her disdain for it, and frequently insults Dulcinea for liking it. This leads to this episode giving a really interesting look on fan toxicity in a funny way which also isn't one-sided. We can still sympathise with Dulcinea at the end of the day despite everything she's done, as we know how much the book means to her, so seeing Miguela slag it off and call Dulcinea crazy for being so passionate about it is quite upsetting. It doesn't justify what Dulcinea did, but it causes her actions to make more sense. However, even alongside that, the episode also has a great message about the power of your creation, not only through how much Dulcinea loves Miguela's writing, but also through how Miguela's poetry was able to bring the Italian bandits to tears, which stopped them from attacking. Whilst you may not like your own work, there will always be someone, even if it's just one crazy cat, who will love it. That's a really inspiring message, and everything put together makes Written By an easy top 3 episode for me. And that's not all the fantastic episodes. Ball Games is another fun episode, and is especially great because of Bahuna's backstory, as I previously mentioned, and Small Change is also brilliant because it's actually a sequel to Fountains, which you remember as one of my favourites from Season 1. While Small Change is slightly inferior to Fountains, it is still really fun, especially with Snarky Dulcinea and Puss's Fountain of 100 Happenings, or whatever it was called, and it was still another banger episode at the end of the day. And then we've got the finale of the season. Because of the major cliffhanger present at the end of the Obelisk episodes, I kinda treat the finale as a two-parter, and both of these episodes are absolutely fantastic. First of all, the various scenes of Dulcinea in this weird-ass Shades version of San Lorenzo with those creepy eyeless versions of herself were legitimately creepy and really well done. Whilst we learned in the final episode this season that they were no threat to Dulcinea, they were still creepy AF, and the lack of any context given in the Obelisk episode made it even creepier. Next, whilst the Obelisk episode is obviously the weaker of the two episodes, as the main El Moco plot isn't really that important, and it's just a final obstacle for the characters to get through, the cliffhanger was absolutely fantastic. Seeing Puss's genuine distress is devastating, and then seeing the carnage which has been unleashed leaves you hyped for the next episode. And then we've got the final episode of this season, The Blood Wolf, the highest rated episode on IMDb. Yeah, it's worthy of the praise, it is absolutely awesome. You know how a lot of action TV shows have that one episode where all the characters appear together to fight the same enemy? Well, we kinda had that in Season 2, but it's even better and more impactful here thanks to more characters being present. Not to mention, the threat is more devastating and thus more engaging, and it's all aided by the titular Blood Wolf, who is one intimidating villain. Yes, your eyes do not deceive you. The idea of a wolf main villain who overpowers Puss in both size and ability isn't an idea first created by The Last Wish. This show did it first. Whilst I do still prefer Death to the Blood Wolf because of how much he ties into Puss's character arc in The Last Wish, the Blood Wolf is still fantastic and intimidating. His power of using a character's greatest fear to defeat them was an incredibly interesting ability which made him even more frightening. Not to mention, I really tensed up when he broke Puss's sword. That's how you know he's a cool villain. Admittedly, the way to defeat him was a bit simple, as all you had to do was touch an amulet against him, but at the same time, how else could you defeat a villain that powerful? Plus, there were still consequences for using the amulet, as the holder gets trapped in the Realm of Shades forever with the Blood Wolf. I feel like these extra stakes added to his defeat helps to make it seem less like a Deus Ex Machina when Uli uses the amulet to trap the Blood Wolf and himself in the Realm of Shades for all eternity, as there were ultimately consequences to his actions. Overall, this was a brilliant finale to a brilliant season, and honestly could have been the finale for the whole show if it wanted to be. It was exciting, it was tense, and it was just really awesome. So overall, Season 4 is the Shrek Forever After to Season 3 Shrek the Third. It is so much better in every way, and it's definitely one of my favourite seasons of the whole show. It has so many fantastic episodes, including many favourites of mine, and it's just a really fun time throughout with a lot of creativity, excitement, and humour, alongside some genuine intensity and stakes by the end. And thankfully, the good streak continues. To say that Season 5 was the next thing to be released after Season 4 would technically be a lie. However, said thing which was released in between the seasons will be covered after I finish talking about this show. Either way, Season 5 directly follows on from the events of last season, and is the final season of the show to consist of 13 episodes. This season revolves around a portal to the Netherworld located right above San Lorenzo, which was left open after the Blood Wolf was released. As a result, a bunch of monsters, as well as some genuinely nice people who were previously trapped in the Netherworld, are emerging onto San Lorenzo, and this season is all about Puss and the gang dealing with these various entities, whether it's fighting them or helping them. All things considered, when compared to the previous seasons, this storyline feels a bit more low-key, although don't mistake that as a bad thing at all, as I'm not saying that the stakes in this season aren't felt, because they absolutely are. What I mean is that the dangers in this season are mostly contained within San Lorenzo, and so feel more like local threats compared to the more devastating threats of seasons 4 and 6. There aren't really any major storylines in a similar vein to the previous season's constant fetch quests, as most of the action takes place in the town. However, despite how local everything is, I have to say that I welcome this change of pace from the previous two seasons, as I did find the constant fetch quests quite a bit repetitive, so this was instead a nice way to spice up the storylines. Not to mention, the idea of having a variety of stuff come out of the portal still provides the season with a lot of variety, as there are so many different and wacky things which come out which makes no two episodes this season feel similar. What fully makes this season feel complete though, is the fact that whilst most of the season was grounded in San Lorenzo, the final 2 episodes took place within the Netherworld instead, which is a wildly different location, which thus continues the variety present in the season, whilst also altering the stakes, and it was just a great way to end the season. As a whole, Season 5 is easily the least repetitive and the most consistently engaging season of the show. Whilst being quite local in its conflicts, so much stuff happens that this season is very entertaining and another strong one overall. I will say though that because of the more low-key nature of the season, I felt like some of the characters took a bit of a hit. I don't mean they were written poorly, instead many of them were written out of the show altogether. The senior Puss squad briefly appear in the first episode, and with the exception of the Sphinx, none of them appear again in this season. And then with the exception of the Duchess, none of the rest of them appear in the show ever again. I mean, a fake version of the Golem appears in the penultimate episode of the show, but that's about it. El Guante Blanco and Goodsword are completely MIA from this point on. I will say that it made sense to offload some of the less necessary characters for this season due to the focus on the aforementioned local threat, as well as the fact that there are constantly new one-off characters added thanks to the portal, so there would have been a risk of overly large casts. However, I think all of the members should have returned in Season 6 at some point instead of just the Duchess. I don't know, I just kinda miss them. Now, I'm not going to mention all of the Portal characters in this brief segment, as most are pretty one-note and only exist to move the plot along in their respective episode. As a result, I'll only talk about them if I talk about the episode they appear in. However, I am going to talk about one character right now, who is a side character who is expanded upon quite a bit in this season, and that's Eames. So, Eames is a pretty nothing character in the first few seasons. He just kind of existed and never really played that much plot relevance. All we knew him as was the Sado who spent most of his life in the cantina.
Oh, wow! That is relatable!
Yeah, in this season, we get a bit more to him. We see how lonely he really is and how he just wants recognition, yet everyone constantly puts him down. Actually, now that I think about it, I suppose his development to his character shows the audience that we were just as bad as the characters because we also never took notice of him. Anyway, in this season, Eames becomes more and more integral to the plots of various episodes, and even saves the town in one of the early episodes of the season. This is a good bit of development for him. However, I assume that because of his heroic deed, everyone would actually start to respect Eames more and would treat him differently. But they don't actually do that, so we don't actually get any development and everyone instead just continues to act like dicks. Come on, this isn't season 3, be nice to Eames. Anyway, just thought I'd mention this character who has now become more important. Also, Eames is actually played by Eric Bowser, so every time he argues with Puss, it's just Eric arguing with himself. That's pretty funny actually. Speaking of Puss, I haven't actually mentioned him yet this season, and that's because I really don't have anything new to add. He's mostly in character this season, so I don't have many criticisms, but he doesn't really have any major moments of depth or development here. He's just entertaining and not too annoying for the most part, and that's about it. Same with Dulcinea. She's great like in season 4 and her dynamic with Puss just gets better and better, but I don't have much else to say. I will say though that I find it weird that the first episode built up the idea of Puss and Dulcinea fighting bandits together instead of just Puss on his own, yet this idea never fully solidified until midway through season 6. Anyway, that's all I've got to say on the main characters, so let's talk about the episodes, which will lead me on to any other significant characters which I haven't already mentioned. I'd say that the episode quality of this season has a similar hit and miss ratio to season 4, with there only really being 2 episodes that I don't like. That being My Fair Demon because Puss hits an all new level of stupidity by trying to turn a demon evil via the goddamn scimitar.
I will beat the children.
And Swine and Roses for being just kinda dumb and boring. However, at the same time, I feel like there aren't as many all-time favourite episodes this season when compared to season 4. For the most part. There are still plenty of great episodes, don't get me wrong, but just not as many on my top 10 list. Either way, I'm still going to talk about the episodes which I enjoyed. Caballo Sin Cabeza, I really hope I pronounced that right, is a really fun episode which gives some growth to Eames as I previously alluded to. I do still wish his development stayed consistent afterwards, but the episode itself is still good. Too Many Cats is a really interesting episode as it consists of various pusses from across the multiverse ending up in San Lorenzo and interacting with one another. Admittedly, the idea isn't fleshed out the best and felt a bit lacking and disappointing at points, however this disappointment was only really relegated to the first half. In the second half, Evil Puss rocks up and starts to stir up trouble, and that becomes really engaging and tense, especially when he pretends to be real Puss and gets the townspeople to turn on good Puss. I'm saying Puss way too much. It's the old switcheroo, but it's done in a really compelling way. So yeah, it's an episode with a disappointing start but a phenomenal end. Before They Hatch is another fun little episode in a similar vein to Caballo Sin Cabeza, which I thoroughly enjoyed, but I don't really have that much to say about it. It has an interesting idea, a good adventure, and features Senora Zapata actually being entertainingly twatty instead of annoyingly so, and was overall another great outing. And then there's The Iceman Melteth. Now, This episode isn't perfect, as it does still feature Puss once again being an idiot by trying to prevent Tim the Iceman from melting by blocking out the frickin' sun like he's Mr. Burns, instead of, you know, getting our TVs to just teleport Tim to a colder area, or getting our TVs to craft some kind of ice box. However, in spite of those problems, the episode is great because it has a lot of heart to it, as well as a genuinely emotional ending where Tim melts away. Yes, he doesn't fully die as it is a kids show, but at the same time we never see him revived, so maybe he didn't actually reform. Who knows? All I do know was that the ending was framed in a way to actually get me to care about Tim the Iceman of all people. That's pretty impressive, all things considered. And now I'm going to skip ahead in the season to the big one, Remember Me Not. This is the big one because this is actually my personal favourite episode of the whole show. I think the best way to describe this episode is a kid-friendly version of the Torchwood episode Adam. Now, for those that don't watch Torchwood, allow me to explain myself in detail whilst also talking about what makes this episode so good. So, in the aforementioned episode The Iceman Melteth, a new orphan called Lil Pecunia randomly shows up with no given introduction. Now, naturally, when I saw her show up with no introduction, I was very confused, especially when the other characters treated her like she had always been there. Two thoughts immediately crossed my mind. Either I accidentally skipped an episode, or the writers just forgot to introduce her. I couldn't find any evidence of an episode I skipped, so just thought that the writers probably forgot and wrote it down in my notes as a criticism. And then this episode happened. It turns out that Lil Pecunia was actually a Shivra who appeared through the portal, and is a being who has the power to alter people's memories to make it seem like she was always there for the characters, which is exactly what Adam did in Torchwood, hence the comparison. This means that having her show up randomly in an episode and having no one bat an eyelid was intentional, as that's when she came through the portal and altered everyone's memory. That is honestly one of the cleverest things I've seen a TV show do. However, this bit of genius isn't the only reason why I love Remember Me Not, as this episode is also one of the most tense and engaging from the whole show. After Dulcinea figures out that Lil Pecunia is an enigma due to not being in Toby's drawings, once again there are parallels to Adam as Yanto's diary was used in that episode to disprove Adam's existence, the Shivra is able to fight back against Dulcinea by altering the memory of the whole town at once to make Dulcinea seem like an evil being from the portal, which causes everyone to turn on her. Now that's something which you don't see in Adam. This ends up leading to arguably the most edge-of-your-seat moment from the whole show, where it genuinely looks like Dulcinea is in real danger of being attacked by Puss. It's only when she uses the pictures once again to convince Puss that she's good, that Puss realizes the truth, which leads to the Shivra being defeated. It's such a compelling episode throughout, from the mystery in the first half to the intense turn the episode takes in its second half, and it's just such a great watch. Add on to that some funny Artevius moments, an interesting setting of Puss's maybe birthday, and a great cliffhanger, and you've got my favourite episode of the entire show. So after that fantastic episode, the finale is probably going to be a lot weaker by comparison. Right? I mean, you are right, but there's still great episodes. The final two episodes of the season, Through Caverns Measureless and A Savage Place, both take place in the Netherworld, and that alone makes them unique and helps them to stand out from the rest of the show. However, to add to that, after jumping into the portal, all the characters now have special abilities. Toby can fly, Artevius has telekinesis, Puss's horse Babieca can talk, and Dulcinea is super strong. However, Puss doesn't have an ability because... I don't know. And in the Netherworld, they meet Hecate, who is played by... Catherine Tate? And you all thought I was done with the Doctor Who references. Nope, I am just getting started.
A wizard!
Well, isn't that wizard?
In these episodes, Puss also meets a race called the Zephylim, and everyone works together to overthrow the monarchy.
We must join forces to defeat the Blind King.
I'm a puppet.
By that I mean, the evil Blind King, who has been hinted at many times in the season, is ruling the Netherworld and controlling the people. And surprise! The Blind King was evil Puss all along. But then we find out that the Shivra is actually the rightful ruler of the Netherworld, the Tiny Queen, who is also being controlled by evil Puss, and so they save her, and there's just a lot going on in these episodes. However, unlike last season where the penultimate episode felt significantly less important until the very end, in this season the penultimate episode feels just as important as the finale, because of how much is going on and how much needs to be built up and fleshed out. The episodes need time to wrap up this arc, and they also need to tie in and reference the other hints given in earlier episodes this season. It overall feels very similar to an RTD era Doctor Who finale, with every hint in the season coming back before getting paid off. Blame Catherine Tate's presence on the Doctor Who parallel.
We are on the same side, Hecate Wizardface.
Oi!
However, whilst a lot was fleshed out in these episodes, I do still wish they gave a reason for Puss's lack of powers, because it ultimately isn't explained. Sure, you can ask questions like, was it because he went into the portal last, or is he just too good for extra powers, or is evil Puss's presence preventing him from gaining powers, or something like that, but I would much rather they actually gave an explanation, as it would help make these episodes feel more complete. Outside of that admittedly minor point though, these episodes are a really strong way to end the season and ultimately help to make this season stand out after a few seasons of repetitive fetch quests. Not to mention it has a very good cliffhanger to tie us over till next season. Overall, Season 5 is another really strong season. Whilst I don't think it's as strong as Season 4 due to there being less absolute favourite episodes for me, it's still very enjoyable throughout with a great overarching story and some true gems of episodes, including my personal favourite from the whole show. I definitely think that the highs of this season helped to put it above Season 1, and the creative use of the Netherworld throughout helps it to stand out from the pack. Its only major problem is its inclusion of more questionable Pahuna jokes in the second episode. Seriously, why are there so many of these jokes? This is a kids show, it's kinda disturbing, not gonna lie. Anyway, on to a different subject. We are nearly done with this show as we only have one more season remaining.
We're in the endgame now.
The show concluded with its final season over 5 years ago in 2018. Yeah, 2018 was 5 years ago. Feel old yet? Anyway, this season strangely enough only has 12 episodes instead of 13 like the last few, but still, it makes good use of those 12 episodes for the most part. This season follows directly on from Season 5. Kinda. You see, for the Netherworld characters, the events of Season 6 take place immediately after Season 5, yet for everyone else who stayed behind, because of the difference in time between the two worlds, it's been a whole year since the characters jumped into the portal. As a result, the season starts with everyone thinking that Puss and the gang are dead, with San Lorenzo overrun with El Moco and his bandits. The first few episodes then consist of Puss and the gang bringing the original townsfolk back home and kicking out the bandits once again. Now, all things considered, that's actually the biggest storyline this season until we get to the finale. You see, the main story this season is a lot more subtle and less impactful on overall stories until the finale. At various points in this season, an earthquake hits and it gradually gets worse and worse as the season goes on. However, it doesn't really become majorly plot relevant until the 10th episode, All Hail Puss, where Puss and the gods try to sort out the problem before the gods just give up. Then we find out through the Shiva that the real world and the Netherworld are colliding, and so the final episodes consist of finding Sino to fix everything. But then he doesn't fix everything, and so the whole world blows up. I'm sorry, what? There was like no real plot for most of the season, and then so much happened at the very end. Whilst the final few episodes did help to balance the overarching plot well, more on those episodes later, this season does still feel a bit aimless at points due to how unimpactful the main storyline is for most of the season. Kinda like Season 3. The only difference is that the threat of the worlds colliding isn't as obvious to the audience and the characters as the Blood Wolf, so I can excuse more fillery episodes unlike with Season 3, as the characters don't know what's going on, so it makes sense for them to just chill for most of the season. Plus, the episodes are actually good here, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, like we've done for every other season, let's talk about the characters. Now, because this is the final season, there aren't really that many new major characters for me to talk about. However, there also aren't that many returning faces, besides the Duchess who comes to adopt all of the orphans, although they all stay in San Lorenzo, so it really isn't that much of a change. This means that there isn't as much for me to talk about here. However, I'm still going to mention any character who has some kind of development this season, as well as one new one-off character who's also worth mentioning. So in this season, two side characters get some secrets revealed about them. Firstly, Cleaver is revealed to be a tulpa instead of a goblin, which explains why she looks different to other goblins. Now, a tulpa is basically a being created by a wizard, in this case Sino, to perform a certain goal. One of the previous tulpas was Orange, one of the creepy eyeless dulcineas in the Realm of Shades, whose goal is to manage the realm and keep the Blood Wolf at bay. Cleaver's main goal as a tulpa was to bring Sino back by helping to reunite his light and dark side. There is a third tulpa as well, but more on them later. Oh yeah, speaking of Sino, it turns out that Artevius is actually a version of Sino, specifically his light side, whilst his dark side was locked away in a guarded tower. Sino ended up splitting his subconscious because he didn't trust himself with the Arcanum, a magical artifact which can practically do anything. He knew the power was so great that anyone, including himself, could be tempted by its power and use it for evil. So he hid the Arcanum away and ensured it was protected and also split his personality until it needed to be reformed again. So yeah, the reason Artevius was so backwards was because he was only one half of a being. Overall, there's quite a lot of character twists this season. However, all of this information is only revealed in the last few episodes, so once again, it can make the middle feel slightly less eventful. Although speaking of the middle of the season, I want to briefly mention Guy Fawkes. Do you get his name? It's like Guy Fawkes except it's a fox, so it's Guy Fawkes and he's got that name because he's British just like Guy Fawkes. Do you get it? Anyway, usually I don't talk about single episode characters like Guy. However, I want to bring him up because I really feel like he should have been introduced earlier in the show, so he could have been in it more. Think about it. Having a fake adventurer frequently rock up would be a great contrast to Puss, who was a real adventurer, and I think it could have led to an interesting dynamic. Maybe Guy becomes jealous and spiteful of Puss, or maybe he redeems himself. I don't know, they could do anything with him and he should have been in the show more. Anyway, those are all the characters I wanted to mention this season. Now, usually I talk about Puss and Dulcinea, however their development this season is directly tied to the finale of the show, and so I'm going to talk about them later when I go into detail on the finale. Instead, I'm going to talk about the individual episodes once again. Overall, this season once again has a pretty consistent lineup of episodes. I'd say that the only real dudder this season was Flock the Boat, which is hardly surprising considering the fact that it brings back the goddamn Sky Pirates and then throws tranches in the mix for some reason. It was dead on arrival, and I'm thankful it was just one episode instead of 3. Anyway, as for the other episodes, the opening two-parter, Save the Town and Save the Cat, was a great way to start the season, and it was great to see a variety of locations, as well as lesser-known San Lorenzo citizens getting some limelight, and was overall quite unique compared to the rest of the show. It all culminated in a great little action scene at the end of Save the Cat, where Puss and Moko tried to put out the Mission Impossible style fuses to prevent the town from blowing up. That was really fun. I also like the episode Bahuna Serve Spirits because it's a cool ghost story with a unique gimmick, that gimmick being giving those possessed by the ghost their heart's desire to help them break free. Not to mention, the twist to the episode that the ghosts are all of the fish that Puss has eaten was really funny. Although, if the ghosts really wanted Puss to not eat fish anymore, just show him Paddock. That certainly did the job for me. And then there's One Last Jobs, which is a sequel to board games due to Roz coming back. Whilst the style feels quite similar to that previous episode, it stands out because of the subplot with Puss running the cantina whilst Bahuna is away. That was absolutely hysterical and stressful, and it was amazing. Whilst I think that Guy Fawkes should have been in the show some more, his episode, Like a Fox, is another strong one, and it was here where Puss and Dulcinea's relationship really started to take off. Speaking of their relationship, there's Not a Date, which is not only a funny episode because of the hijinks with Puss and Dulcinea's lakeside holiday, but it was also funny because we get to see a completely broken El Mocco, who has just gone completely crazy from humiliation after he was beaten by Puss so many times. This was his last appearance in the show, and I think this was a humorous way to end his character. And now I want to mention All Hail Puss, which I am shocked isn't terrible. It's not amazing, but it could have easily been one of the worst episodes of the show. It's all about Puss getting godlike powers from the Sky Gods. Oh yeah, I forgot to talk about the Sky Gods. To be fair, I have no opinions on them whatsoever. They are perfectly adequate. Anyway, after getting the powers, Puss becomes even more arrogant than usual, which should be a recipe for disaster, yet it works because of how furious Dulcinea gets with him, which really puts Puss in his place. Plus, Puss's sheer determination at the end of the episode shows that he does still have a good heart and allows the audience to continue to sympathise with him in spite of his many flaws. And now we've got the final two episodes, which are pretty closely tied together and are easily the highlights of the season. The penultimate episode, The Moving Finger Rites, is a really enjoyable but tense episode with the characters traversing through a dangerous tower and fighting off against a Red Shiva, who, unlike the Tiny Queen who could alter memories, can alter their appearance to anyone from your memory. This leads to a quick Golem cameo and also leads to a tense story as you're never sure who to trust. The episode as a whole is a great action flick, but is then capped off with a fantastic cliffhanger with the emergence of Sino. And then we have the final episode of the show, called And Having Writ Moves On. I don't know what that title means. Where so much happens. To fully explain my thoughts on the episode, I just have to explain what happens first. So, Sino learns about the colliding worlds and says that they need to return to San Lorenzo to find the aforementioned Arcanum to fix everything. The Arcanum turns out to be in the obelisk, however because of its power, Sino used a third tulpa which would be summoned if anyone, including him, tried to take it. It turns out that this third tulpa is actually Dulcinea, who ends up losing herself and attacking Puss, and basically kills him because Puss doesn't fight back. Then Dulcinea kisses Puss, which brings him back because the power of love or some crap like that, but everyone is too late to save the world, as everywhere except San Lorenzo is destroyed due to the worlds colliding, with San Lorenzo only remaining intact because Sino restored the protective spell over the town. In order to save the world, Sino uses the Arcanum to send Puss back in time to the first episode and convinces him to never enter San Lorenzo, because Puss's actions were ultimately led to the world's destruction. Seriously, if Puss didn't break the seal, Uli wouldn't have gotten into some of the Blood Wolf, the Netherworld portal wouldn't have opened up, and the worlds wouldn't have collided. Damn, Puss royally screwed up. However, in doing that, the townspeople would lose all their memories of Puss, which basically means that the show never happened for anyone other than Puss who got to keep his memory. However, Dulcinea requests Sino to return to the past with Puss, whilst the OG Dulcinea stays localized to the now protected San Lorenzo, and the pair head off into the sunset for many more adventures. Yeah, that was a lot to take in, and did you know that this finale is divisive?
That's putting it mildly, 007.
So, a lot of people have an issue with the fact that this finale basically rewrites the entire show and makes it so it never happened. Yeah, I think that is a fair critique, as its non-existence does make the whole show feel kind of pointless in the eyes of the viewer. However, I personally disagree with this opinion to some extent, because Puss does still have his memories, and he's clearly more developed by the end of the show. He learned to settle down, he found proper love, he found true friendship with someone he could actually trust, and he was treated as something more than an outlaw for the first time in a while. He's changed, and seeing him lose it all is something I find quite upsetting. Alongside that, I feel like this finale actually aids the Last Wish. Even though Puss learned to settle down in this show, he still walks alone in movies like The Last Wish, and I think the reason why he went against what he learned was because he doesn't want to risk losing everything after settling down again, like how he lost all the San Lorenzans after becoming attached to them. I think this ending makes Puss a more compelling character in the grand scheme of the franchise, instead of just this show, and I loved it honestly. Yes, there's an argument to be made that this show isn't canon, more on that later, and you could say that I'm reading way too much into its Last Wish connection. However, considering the fact that The Last Wish also featured a wolf main villain like this show, that says to me that the creators of The Last Wish did take some inspiration from this show, and so it's more possible than you think that The Last Wish actually capped off the end of this story. Overall, I love the resolution to Puss's arc. What I was less fussed on though was Dulcinea coming back. As a result of her return, it kind of feels like Puss didn't actually lose that much in the grand scheme of things, as he got to stay with the one person he truly cared about. It kind of feels like he didn't fully appreciate the fact that he lost everything because of his constant poor actions. Instead, he got to stay with Dulcinea in spite of everything. Also, surely Sino couldn't allow two Dulcineas at once, right? That just feels really irresponsible on his part, as it could really screw up the timelines. I know the two Dulcineas will never meet, but even then it is still a potential risk. I don't know, I just felt like this bit of the ending was quite unnecessary and was a bit too overly positive when it should have been more devastating to account for Puss's actions. Also, if this show is intended to take place before the first movie, where's the explanation for where the hell Dulcinea went? Did she and Puss just part ways? That feels like a really strange implication to have, because they very clearly cared for each other deeply, and were built up into a couple, so why would they just part ways? Again, you could argue that the show is just non-canon, but I'm instead going to come up with my own personal headcanon to explain where Dulcinea went, because that's more fun. I believe that Dulcinea could actually only stay with Puss for one more day. Sino is clearly a kind soul, so he was willing to give future Dulcinea one final wish before she faded away with everyone else, and so allowed her to spend one more day with Puss. In doing so, it gives Puss and Dulcinea one more chance to say goodbye to one another, but it won't disrupt the whole timeline. I feel like that is the best explanation for where she went after the show, and why Puss ended up moving on to someone else. Like I said though, that's not a fact, it's just headcanon and what I'd like to believe. Anyway, I haven't really talked about Puss and Dulcinea as a whole in this season, but they really are great. After 6 seasons of build up, it was satisfying to see them finally become a proper couple, and episodes like Not a Date played on this in a really fun way as previously mentioned. Whilst I do think that the power of love saving Puss in the final episode was dumb, I'd say that overall dynamic and relationship was strong. I think it especially works because Dulcinea is a lot more assertive with Puss than she used to be, as shown in All Hail Puss, and I think that makes them seem like a more believable and stable couple. So yeah, our main characters ended on a high and I feel like they fully developed by the end of the show. Dulcinea became more of her own person and broke away from her TAOPIB roots and her over-reliance on her book, and Puss learned about how his arrogance can cause major problems, which is why he feels a lot less arrogant in the first movie and the Shrek movies, before his increase in popularity in The Last Wish caused him to return to his old ways somewhat. Speaking of the characters though, I have to say that the most disappointing thing about the finale for me was the shocking lack of returning characters. For me, a good show finale should reference or bring back every major character to give them all satisfying ends, but this episode didn't really do that. We never saw key characters like El Guante Blanco return, despite the fact they had every right to. If they couldn't find a place to bring him back, fair enough, but they should have at least included him in that montage sequence where Puss reflects on his time in San Lorenzo. It's just a small thing which personally bugged me about the finale, although it's not a big problem at the end of the day. But overall, if I take my headcanon into consideration, this was a fantastic end to the show with a tense and exciting final few episodes and plenty of enjoyable and fun episodes throughout. I'd say that this is a step up from Season 5 and on par with Season 4, and I am really thankful that the show actually ended on a high. And now that I've finished talking about the final season, I'm going to go over some final thoughts on the show as a whole. So overall, I think The Adventures of Puss in Boots is a pretty good show all things considered, and it's highly underrated. I'm going to be honest, I wanted to make this whole retrospective purely because I saw basically no in-depth reviews for the show on YouTube, and so I wanted to be the first to talk about it in this much detail. Once again, it's kind of funny looking back at my script now that Haley has made her video covering the TV show. Maybe I should have finished this video sooner. Anywho, whilst the show does have some stinker episodes, a sometimes grating Puss, and a real low point in Season 3, the overall package is solid. It's oftentimes fun, creative, and unique with some really great episodes and compelling storylines. Yeah, its animation ain't great, but I personally got used to it quick, and I feel like the quality of it improved with each new season, so try not to let it put you off watching. This show is nowhere near one of the best cartoon shows ever made. I mean, it's obviously no Gravity Falls. However, it's a mostly enjoyable time, and if you love Puss in Boots as much as I do, then there's nothing wrong with checking it out. If you're less willing to check out the whole show because of lack of time or you want to avoid the bad episodes, then I recommend just checking out the episodes which I said I liked. Obviously you may not like these episodes as this video is just my opinion, but you might as well give them a shot. And if you want an even shorter list, I will give my personal top 10 favourite episodes of the whole show right now. I obviously won't go into detail on these episodes as I've already talked about them all earlier. Anyway, my top 10 goes like this. Number 10, Sphinx. Number 9, A Savage Place. Number 8, Fountains. Number 7, No. Number 6, and having writ, moves on. Number 5, The Blood Wolf. Number 4, The Moving Finger Writes. Number 3, In Dreams. Number 2, Written By. And number 1, Remember Me Not. Once again, those are just my personal favourites. And before I fully wrap up this overly long segment of this video, I'll quickly rank the seasons. From worst to best, my season ranking goes 3, 2, 1, 5, 6, and then 4. It was tough choosing between seasons 4 and 6, but I chose 4 because the episodes were just a lot stronger, besides Breaking Good and Little Lamb. But in conclusion, this show was an enjoyable time and I'm glad I saw it and got to review it. However, before I talked about season 5, I alluded to the fact that there was another product which went in between seasons 4 and 5. Whilst it is technically a part of this show, I decided to talk about it in a completely separate segment because it is a special and just feels different to the rest of the show. Let's talk about this product. Puss in Book, get it? Trapped in an Epic Tale is a Netflix interactive special from 2017, which was created as a special episode for the TV show. It was also the very first Netflix interactive special ever made. No, I'm not joking. Black Mirror Bandersnatch came about thanks to Puss in Boots. That's just crazy. Anyway, what's this supposed epic tale actually about? Well, it's all about Puss getting trapped in a book where he has to choose how to continue the story and can only get out when he reaches the end. In going through the book, he sees various fairy tale parodies starring most of the main characters from the TV show, until he reaches the end and finds out that the book was being controlled by Bartholomew Fishflinger. Remember him? To be fair, you probably won't remember him unless you saw the show yourself, as I barely mentioned him. Anyway, something happens, Puss defeats him, Maltese gets trapped for all eternity, roll credits. Well, I should probably clarify that this is the story if you take the main route, as shown in the non-interactive version. There is an alternate ending though, where Puss just brute forces his way out after meeting the goddamn Sky Pirates again. I'm just gonna say now that I was only able to get footage from the non-interactive version of the special, so extra choices like this won't appear in this video, but I did still watch the interactive version. Alright, so I'm just gonna cut to the chase here. I'm not the biggest fan of this special, and clearly I'm not the only one. I mean, I would rather rewatch this special than most of the episodes from season 3 of the TV show, but all things considered, this special is just kind of boring more than anything. It really isn't very epic, and when compared to the rest of the TV show, this is absolutely one of the weaker episodes. The problem is that the plot is paper thin, and so stuff just kind of happens with no substance to it whatsoever. One minute Puss is Goldilocks, and the next Dulcinea is the evil queen. It's just a load of stuff, and it's hard to really connect to. Although to be fair, this is just kind of a problem with interactive adventures in general. You can't really craft interesting, compelling narratives because you always have to ensure it makes sense to the audience no matter what choices they pick. However, the real reason the special is boring is because it's just not entertaining. The fairy tale subversions aren't really that fun, and the special overall is shockingly unfunny. I mean, there are a couple of humorous moments like everything with Artavius, and Dulcinea as the evil queen was pretty novel to see, but for me, many of the jokes just didn't land. A lot kinda came out of nowhere, and many were just too weird, like that interpretive dance scene with the bears. What was that? Was that meant to be funny? Because it wasn't. It was just weird. Now you might think that despite the special itself being boring, it could still potentially be somewhat interesting thanks to the interactive nature of it. Well, I'm sorry to say this, but this just isn't a very good interactive adventure either. The problem with it is that a good chunk of the choices ultimately mean nothing, so the viewer lacks a sense of control. In many instances, one of the choices you pick will end up being replaced by the other choice anyway. If my choice was ultimately going to lead to nothing but wasted time, why would you give me the option to choose it? Alongside that, the interactive aspect of the story is very intrusive, which makes the overall package worse, because every time a choice needs to be made, the special stops dead in its tracks to talk about them, which just completely breaks the pacing and adds to the bore factor of the special for me. So overall, Trapped in an Epic Tale is kinda naff. It's pretty boring and unengaging and doesn't have many good jokes to make the experience more enjoyable. Add on to that the fact that it's just a poorly made interactive special, and you've got something which I definitely call a miss from this franchise. Luckily, we can kind of write this special off as non-canon now. Since The Last Wish is released, we have seen a version of the Three Bears which are wildly different than the ones here, so much so that when they spoke without a British accent in this special, I freaked out. Therefore, I think it's fair to say that we can't exactly call this special canon anymore, because it doesn't line up with future superior releases.
This story not part of standard continuity.
As a result, this means that you're allowed to skip this if you ever plan on watching through the entire Puss in Boots canon, so more power to you. It's a shame you still have to watch season 3 of the TV show though. Man, I have dissed season 3 way too much in this video. Anyway, Trapped in an Epic Tale is bad, but luckily the next short is so much better in every way. The The final piece of media I'm going to cover today is the very recently released short, The Trident, which came out in 2023 as a DVD extra for The Last Wish. It is also by far the shortest thing I'm covering in this video due to being only 3 minutes in length. So naturally I'm probably going to find a way to extend it out further than it needs to be in this segment. The short is all about Puss and Kitty telling my boy Polito one of the ways that Puss died. This death is specifically death number 5, which was obviously shown in The Last Wish during the montage. The story is all about Puss trying to retrieve a trident from some pirates. Yes, before you ask, this short is better than every Sky Pirate episode from the TV show, and so he's stopped by Kitty and the Bear family. One thing leads to another, Puss gets shoved into a cannon and Kitty saves him. However, Puss couldn't accept the fact that Kitty saved him, so instead made it out like he wanted to be shot from the cannon, and that it would revolutionize transport. And right off the bat, I love the idea of using shorts like this to go into more detail on Puss's deaths. Obviously the deaths were only shown off for a few seconds each in The Last Wish, so it's fun to see one of them expanded upon into a whole story. However, whilst the short expands upon the film, it doesn't retcon anything and still fits in the narrative really well. Puss is reckless and arrogant in the short and wastes one of his lives, which lines up with Death's disdain for Puss. Furthermore, I also really love the ending where we can clearly see Puss visibly embarrassed about the incident when Kitty mentions how it was all caused by his ego. Now that Puss has learned to appreciate his last life, it's nice to see that he's aware of where he messed up in the past. It just adds to his character and the narrative of the film really well. In fact, all the characters in the short were great. Polito is funny and wholesome like always, and I love the use of the more playful dynamic with Puss and Kitty in the flashbacks, where you basically see them trying their hardest to one-up each other. That's really fun like usual. I will say though that I did think the inclusion of Goldie and the Bears was a bit random, as it didn't really add much to the story, but I love these characters so I didn't exactly mind seeing them again. However, whilst the characters are great, the main reason I enjoyed this short as much as I did was because of something you've probably picked up on already. This short uses the same amazing stylized animation as The Last Wish, and it once again looks glorious. The drop frames aid the action once again, and the colours really pop, especially for the moments where Polito interrupts the story. That looks really cool. I can't believe that the creative team actually went to the effort to make this short look this good. It's just a DVD extra which most viewers of the film won't watch, yet they still put in all the effort to make the short as good as possible. That is honestly really admirable. There's a reason why I love everyone who worked on The Last Wish, because they are constantly putting in so much extra effort to make something truly special. And I think The Trident is a great example of this team going above and beyond when they really didn't have to. I love this team so much. There's one last thing I want to mention about this short. Eric Bowser once again did a great job impersonating Puss, whilst Margot Ray was also a great impersonator for Kitty Softpaws. Yeah, for some reason Puss and Kitty had different voice actors, whilst Polito, Goldie, Papa and Baby had the original actors. I'm guessing this happened as a result of problems with recording remotely due to COVID, but either way, I just wanted to say that the different actors didn't detract from my enjoyment of the special at all, and I don't get why some people have rated it lower just because of that fact. Overall, The Trident is a must-watch if you want more Last Wish content. It's fun, it's stylized, it's a prime example of this team trying way harder than they need to for everything, and the short even aids Puss's character in the narrative of the film. As a whole, I absolutely love The Trident. Now please give me more of Team Friendship. I'd totally watch a miniseries with these three, even if it was just a compilation of 3-minute shorts akin to this. Please do it, I need sustenance.
And now for something completely different.
Alright, so I've covered all of the major televised pieces of Puss in Boots media. However, one thing I was constantly thinking about during these viewings were when do these various stories take place within the Puss in Boots canon? After thinking about it way too much, I've now come up with my own timeline of events to explain Puss's whole story, and I figured that this could be a fun way to end this video. Now before I start explaining the timeline, I just want to say that this is my personal interpretation of when the events play out. Although this timeline will feature headcanons, speculations and theories, and you may disagree with what I claim, and that's okay. Feel free to come up with your own timeline if you want. Also, I won't be including Trapped in Epic Tale because, as I said before, I don't think it's canon. Either way, here is how I think Puss's story pans out. So obviously the timeline starts with the flashback sequences from the original film. Puss meets Humpty and is eventually exiled from San Ricardo after the robbery. The only event which we know for a fact happened soon after this incident was Puss meeting and getting mentored by El Guante Blanco. However, the time between the flashbacks and the main events of the first movie is said to be 7 years according to Humpty, which means that a lot could have happened in this gap. Therefore, I do believe that the TV show, as well as any off-screen adventures which took place before the TV show, happened in this gap. My guess is that the day Puss was sent back to in the finale of the show was at some point in the middle of that 7-year gap to give him time to have adventures before the TV show, like his quest with Jack Sprat or his incident with the Duchess, but it will also give him time to move on from Dulcinea before meeting Kitty. Whether Dulcinea faded away or just went on her own adventures is still a mystery though. A few years later, the events of the first movie happen. Puss clears his name, meets Kitty Softpaws for the first time, and changes his reputation into one of a hero and a legend instead of an outlaw. A few days later, the events of the 3 Diablos takes place, with Puss now performing heroic duties at the request of others. Then an unknown amount of time passes until the events of Shrek 2. We don't know what Puss did in this period other than presumably slaying an ogre at some point, before eventually ending up in Far Far Away. Then the events of all the Shrek movies happen. Puss befriends Shrek and so decides to stick around with him for a while. My guess is that Puss stuck around because he still felt like he had a debt to pay to Shrek after trying to kill him, and so decided to help him out with his first few tough years as a father, which explains why he was present for all the other sequels and the holiday specials. However, once the kids grew up and Shrek was able to cope on his own, he didn't need the extra help and support from Puss, and so Puss started to miss his life of adventure and so left the swamp. During this period after the Shrek movies, Puss takes on more and more quests instead of constantly running away like he used to, and thus has more extreme adventures and greater victories. This leads to more praise and fame, which starts to go to Puss's head just like it did in San Lorenzo, and so Puss starts to become more reckless and dies many times. I personally believe that all of Puss's deaths occurred during this period after the Shrek movies but before the Last Wish. During this period, the events of the Trident take place where Puss and Kitty reunite somewhat. Due to the fact that Jack Horner uses the Trident in The Last Wish, it is assumed that Kitty is under Jack's employment at this time, and so stole the Trident to give it to Jack. Now I imagine that Puss and Kitty reunited with each other many times before this short, as they would often end up partaking in the same adventures. Sometimes they work together, and sometimes they're against each other. However, in terms of their relationship, I don't think they're an official couple at this point, and are instead just friendly rivals who meet from time to time, and occasionally flirt with each other. The reason I believe this is because if they were officially dating during the period between the original film and the Trident, then Puss is a dick for flirting with many other women. Anyway, after dying in the Trident, Puss dies another 2 times, and one time was during a return to Far Far Away where he met Gingy again. It's possible he didn't reunite with Shrek though. I then personally believe that between deaths 7 and 8, Kitty wanted to officially get together with Puss and tie the knot, which leads to the events of Santa Coloma where Puss does a runner. The aftermath of Santa Coloma still feels pretty raw for Kitty in the movie, so I assume it was relatively recent. And then we finally get to the main events of The Last Wish, where Puss is now down to his 9th and final life, but has learned to value it after his run-in with death. Alongside that, he was successfully able to make up to Kitty and now travels with her and Perito. And finally, we end the timeline with the campfire segments from the Trident, which I like to believe happened immediately after the movie during the journey between the Dark Forest to Del Mar, before Team Friendship steal the governorship and return to Far Far Away. And that's how I believe the timeline plays out. Maybe this will be completely disproven when Shrek 5 comes out and we see Puss reunite with Shrek, which will explain where he went for so many years, but at the moment I'm happy with this timeline. Now, let's finally wrap up this overly long video. So that was every piece of the Puss in Boots canon that I wanted to cover before my big Last Wish analysis. Overall, I'd say that most of the things featured in this video were good but not amazing. There were a few exceptions to that rule of course, as some parts of the TV show were surprisingly fantastic, although at the same time some parts of the show were also god-awful. However, for the most part, the products are good on the whole. The first movie is an enjoyable enough watch in spite of its flaws and has some great characters and action. The 3 Diablos is simple but adorable. The TV show has some really high highs and low lows, but it's overall an entertaining, underrated show, and the Trident is a wonderful addition to The Last Wish, which went above and beyond in its quality. Oh, and then there's Trapped in an Epic Tale, which is bleh. On the whole though, I am glad that I did this video, as it was great watching everything, and also seeing how it occasionally helped to aid aspects of The Last Wish was also quite interesting. The Puss in Boots canon is a decent and enjoyable time all things considered, but nothing even holds a candle to The Last Wish. Be sure to watch this space for when I eventually finish my analysis. It will probably take a while though, as I want to get it right. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and be sure to leave me your thoughts on anything from this video which you've seen yourself. I'd especially love to hear more opinions on the TV show, as I've still heard very little. Anyway, if you want more from me, then be sure to subscribe and also make sure to take care. Goodbye everyone, and thanks for watching.